Good morning, everybody. Isn't this a beautiful room? Thank you to the NVTA staff. If you are a staff member that helped put this together, please raise your hand so we can acknowledge you and thank you. I'm sure Laura and Kate and Kathy and who else? Anybody else? Don't be shy. Well, I want to thank, there we go.
Thank you, Kate.
I'm up here because I just did not feel comfortable having my back to everybody else there. So I kind of jumped up here, but let's go ahead and begin today's meeting. It is now 9:05. So I want to welcome everybody and hereby call this meeting to order. Special meeting for the Napa Valley Transportation Authority. As we know, it's Wednesday, May 17th. If you didn't know, now you do know. Let's see here. Let's have a lead. Do we have a flag for the Pledge of Allegiance on the screen? Okay, wonderful. Vice Chair Mark Joseph, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God. Thank you. Number 3 on our agenda this morning is consideration and approval of the board member request for remote participation. Do we have any board member requests for remote participation?
We do not.
Thank you. And that is a good time to let everybody know we are on Zoom and we are live streaming. Laura, would you please move forward with roll call?
Leon Garcia.
Here.
Mark Joseph. Donald Williams.
Present.
Kevin Eisenberg. Liz Alessio.
Present.
Scott Sedgley. Alfredo Pedroza. Ryan Gregory.
Here.
Paul Doring.
Here.
Anna Shuto. Margie Moeller.
Here.
Eric Knight.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Excellent. Number 5 is adoption of the agenda. Do we have any changes to the agenda? If not, is there a motion and a second to adopt the agenda? Thank you. So we had a motion to adopt the agenda as is by Director Garcia and a second by Joseph. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any nays? Thank you. Item number 6 is public comment. You get to come up here and talk on this nice hot mic. If we have anybody in the public who'd like to make a public comment at this time. Is there anybody who wishes to make public comment? Not seeing any, we get to move on to item number 7. That's chairpersons, board members, MTC, and ABAG updates. Do we have any ABAGs from any chairpersons? Do we have an ABAG update? Oh, okay. Okay, so ABAG meets tomorrow. Okay, very good. Do we have an MTC update?
Of course. Thank you, Chair Alessio. So it's been quite a busy few weeks or days at MTC. Many of you did attend the MTC workshop that we hosted here in Napa, April 26th and 27th. Great discussion around the housing initiatives, the crisis we're in, but also grappling with the transportation fiscal cliff we're facing. I do want to thank all you that attended, but we also had great participation from commissioners throughout, the region. They always love coming to Napa, especially the commissioners from Sonoma County. But it was a really robust recommitment to the priorities. We've had some change at MTC Commission. As you know, Alex Bockelman is here with me. She's a deputy director, might have a new position coming here shortly, but we also hired Andy Vermeer. And part of what we want to do is make sure that the commission was committed to the priorities that we have set forward. So it was a good discussion. There was, again, a renewed commitment to looking at housing, a regional measure potentially on the ballot in 2024. President Arreguín has been very committed to that, but we're also grappling with the fact of the fiscal cliff and the need for transit, funding in a sustainable manner. So we talked a little bit about that as well. And something that I'm really committed to is network management. We talk about whether you're riding the Vine, the ferry, Caltrain, if there's ways to improve those experiences, we should. And we just transitioned I think at this commission meeting, we created a new committee called Network Management. that's going to be talking about some of those initiatives. So again, really robust retreat that we had here in Napa. And there's a lot going on, but what I'll tell you, just what's pressing and what's taking a lot of our time right now is the fact that it's either $2.8 billion or $2 billion of the fiscal cliff for transit operators. That's BART, that's Caltrain, that's Napa Vine, that's Smart Train. How do we grapple with that? So we have been working very closely with our state legislators. It's a shared responsibility. It's the state, it's MTC, and it's our operators that all have to come to the table of how do we close that gap. It's going to hurt because we have to find that money somewhere, somehow, but it's doing it together. So we've been having those conversations, and that is priority number one. Between now and Monday, there's going to be a series of meetings that we're all involved in to talk about that. So that's kind of the highlights. And then MTC is hosting the California Transportation Commission today. They'll be acting on the tolling for State Route 37. I know Mayor Garcia has been an advocate of that. We all know what that means when State Route 37 has flooding issues. It's called diversion effect, and it impacts our community. So that's the report. I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for that report. Very timely too on the transit topic. Are there any questions for Director Pedrosa? Very good. Okay. And there's no updates from any board members. Thank you. Is there an executive director update?
There is. Well, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see everybody here on this day that we can talk about something that we think is very important, the Vine Transit System. I did want to thank Kathy Alexander, Laura Sanderlin, Rebecca Schenk, Libby Payan, Valerie Walston, and Danielle Schmitz for the work that they did to bring all of this together today. Bike to Wherever Day is tomorrow. I'd like to see all of you on bikes on the way to work. That'd be great, or wherever, even if you're going to do an errand at the store. NVTA will host an Energizer station adjacent to the Vine Trail just south of Vallejo on Soskel between 7 and 9 a.m. It'd be great if you stopped by and saw us. And we appreciate any support that you want to give us tomorrow for the efforts that staff are doing, and especially Diana Meehan, who always leads the charge on everything active transportation. State Route 37 is going to be closed this weekend for smart maintenance. So if you're heading out that way, make sure you use another highway and avoid State Route 37. Probably just avoid going that way. It's the best approach. Let's see. The public is invited to take a traffic safety survey as part of the Vision Zero effort to eliminate traffic deaths and severe injuries on our roadways. The survey is located on NVTA's website under Vision Zero survey and will be open until June 1st. In addition, there is an interactive map where members of the public can highlight areas where there is an excessive, where they experience excessive speeding or other traffic violations, and where improvements can be made. Cal State Transportation Agency listening session was held at MTC on Tuesday, May 9th. NVTA staff participated in the listening session. It was about, addressing the public transit fiscal cliff. In addition, Secretary Tokes Omishakin and other Cal STA staff participated and heard about the ongoing challenges of Northern California operators and proposed policy solutions to help improve transit in California. Climate Action Now, in coordination with St. Helena Council Member Anna Chateau and NVTA board member, and Napa Vice Mayor Beth Painter is holding its first Climate Action Summit on May 24th at Napa Valley College, and NVTA staff have been invited to participate. NVTA Principal Planner Diana Meehan served as a panelist focusing on Vision Zero on the Institute of Transportation Engineers webinar entitled Safe Systems Approach. And NVTA Marketing and Public Communication staff Valerie Walston is tabling at the Rolfs Manor Resource Fair on June 9th from 10 to 1 p.m. Valerie will be sharing about transportation options, resources for seniors, including Taxi Script, VineGo, and Clipper discount information. And once again, this year, NVTA is providing extended Vine bus service for Bottle Rock during the 3-day Memorial Day weekend event to make sure everybody gets home and that they get home safely. And that concludes my report.
Thank you for that report.
Moving on to item 9, which is our consent agenda items, 9.1 through 9.9. Do any board members wish to pull any item from the consent agenda? Not seeing any. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda? Very good. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent? Approved. Thank you. So motion by Director Perdosa, second by Joseph. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? Very good. Moving on to item 10, which brings us here today, primarily is the board retreat. This is an informational item to discuss ways to revive Vine Transit. There will be time at the end of the presentation for public comment. So we start with our presentation and with the Executive Director of Policy. I'll take a seat now. Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to kick this off, and then staff will provide a presentation on everything Vine Transit. So today we're going to be talking about options for reviving the Vine Transit system. Staff is going to provide a little history, a summary of the efforts that we've undertaken both before and since the pandemic to both update, modernize, and improve the Vine Transit system. One critical thing to note is that the Vine was showing gradual growth in ridership at the beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic, as a result of some of the service changes that were implemented. And the Vine was one of the few systems in the country where ridership was trending up. So when the worldwide pandemic-related shutdown occurred in March of 2020, staff reacted by reducing services, in some cases significantly modifying services, and much of the service has never been fully restored because of COVID-related driver leave and many drivers who retired or quit due to health and safety concerns. We haven't had a full roster of drivers for over 3 years. In response to the inconsistency of our labor force, we have had to adjust services a number of times. We know that the riding public wants reliable, direct, and frequent services, and the Vine has not been able to deliver that consistently, which is likely the primary underlying reason that the Vine ridership remains depressed. Today, we will be discussing ideas on how to reverse that trend. We will also be recommending next steps that will include, in part, a community-wide survey, updating our comprehensive operational analysis, and continuing to advocate for new operating funding. Next slide, please. So Alex probably recognizes this slide. We borrowed this slide from MTC. And I just wanted to show it because compared to other parts of the country, transit systems in California are grossly underfunded by the state. The slide shows that public transportation in other high population states are funded at roughly twice the rate that public transportation is funded in California. I would underscore that there has been no meaningful increases to supplement existing transit operating revenues since the passage of the Transportation Development Act in 1971. So we can evaluate, plan, and use all the tools we have to make incremental improvements to the Vine, but we also need champions to help revive transit in California and to regain the public's trust of and respect for public transportation. We need policy reforms that aid and support public transit operations on our city streets and highways, policies that put transit first, not as an afterthought of how we've designed streets and highways. And we need to ensure our land use policies have a rich diversity of uses that brings housing closer to work, services, schools, and encourages transit ridership. We live in communities that prioritize cars, even in downtown locations where we should be investing in transit, walking, and other active transportation modes. In these locations in particular, we should prioritize transit and put stops and shelters in safe, convenient locations that would encourage transit ridership, not discourage it. We can collectively do better. We can make transit a priority, and by doing so, we can improve the quality of life for the underserved populations in our community, low-income workers, children who rely on public transit to get to school, elderly and disabled populations that need transit to access services. We all benefit. Public transit serves our workers that travel from affordable areas for more affordable areas to fill jobs in Napa Valley. It removes cars on our roads and our highways and helps minimize traffic congestion, improving air quality. And that is why we should all be champions for public transit. So with that, I'd like to introduce Danielle Schmitz, Napa Valley Transportation Authority's Director of Capital Development and Planning.
Good morning, Danielle Schmitz, Director of Capital Development and Planning. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Vine history, as well as some milestones that the Vine has reached over the last 10 years, just to provide some context of where we are. I would also like to mention there are banners around the room that provide more detailed history of the Vine system in Napa Valley. So I'd encourage you all to take a look at those during a break or at lunch. But in the Vine, which actually started as an acronym for Valley Intercity Neighborhood Express, was started in 1990 by the city of Napa. There has been public transit in Napa Valley as early as the 1900s when we had electric rail that brought people from San Francisco and other parts of the Bay Area to Napa and up to Calistoga for recreational purposes. And then there was bus operation in the city of Napa as early as 1970s. But the Vine, which was branded first in this yellow or orange, yellow, green logo and brand, was started by the city of Napa. It was operated out of the Public Works Department, and it was a collaboration between the town of Yountville County and city of Napa. In 1998, the responsibility switched to the what was Napa County Transportation and Planning Agency, which is now Napa Valley Transportation Authority, just because we serve as a joint powers authority. So we have representation of all 6 jurisdictions. And really for the regional coordination of transit, it makes sense to have it couched there and allowed for more regional coordination. So innovations and milestones over the last 10 years for transit. In 2013 and 2014, we implemented a computer-aided dispatch and automated vehicle locator on all of our buses. This not only helped on the back end for the dispatchers and operationally to see in real time where the bus was to facilitate any service disruptions, it also helps the end user on the front end understand, oh, my bus is going to be here in 4 minutes, because we would have electronic display signs at various bus stops. And so that was quite profound for the bus system. In 2015, we also implemented automated passenger counters, which we installed in each of the buses. This was actually done by hand before. So a bus driver would actually tally on a clipboard when somebody had boarded the bus, and it was reconciled through our fare box. So as you can imagine, having an automated passenger counter really cut down on errors, improved quality control, and also operations, because the bus operator has 100 other things that he or she is working on. In 2017, we also launched the Ride the Vine app, which is still alive and well today in all the smaller jurisdictions. So on a smartphone, you can use to hail a bus through an application in Yountville, Calistoga, St. Helena, or call dispatch. We also invested in Remix software, and Remix software really revolutionized the way we do transit planning. Before, you had to do it by hand. So you would literally take out maps, get on Excel, look at census tracts, and figure out, where the best place is to put a route. And it could take days or weeks. With Remix software at your fingertips, we're able to pull up a map of any of the jurisdictions, place a line on the roadway network, draw a line from point to point, and instantaneously we're able to have a pretty high level view of how much is that route going to cost us, how many bus operators do we need, how many vehicles do we need, and we're also able to do Title VI analysis at our fingertips and have we understand the propensity of ridership with this software. So it's revolutionized a lot of the way we do some of our route planning. We're able to then, kind of in an instant figure out, oh, is this route, is it feasible, relatively speaking? In 2018, we also invested in mobile ticketing, token transit, as well as Clipper. And then in 2019, we created the comprehensive operational analysis, as Kate mentioned a little bit in her opening. We really looked at the entire transit network, took a deep dive into what's going to make the system more feasible, more streamlined, and work better for the end user, and looked at how we are going to grow ridership. And so that was completed in 2019, and we daylighted the routes in January of 2020 from that comprehensive operation analysis. In 2021, we also got a new cloud-based CAT AVL system, as well as finished the funding package for the Vine maintenance facility, which was really going to allow us to convert our entire fleet to zero emission, whether it be electric or hydrogen, whatever it is in the future. The maintenance facility was going to be what's going to allow us to operate for the next 50 years. In 2022, we had our first delivery of our electric vehicle buses, which some are on the roadway today. And we also broke ground on the Vine maintenance facility. And then finally in 2023, where we are today, we updated our Ride the Vine apps with mobile payments, so Clipper 2.0, as well as token transit. And we are currently working with Amazon Web Services on a HERE pilot, which is really going to interface both the fixed route system and on-demand system onto one application, make it a lot easier for the end user for trip planning on that end. And then before I turn it over to Rebecca, our transit manager, I'm just going to give you kind of a high-level overview, set the context of where we were in January of 2020. So in blue are all the changes that we made in January of 2020. And as mentioned before, the comprehensive operational analysis took a deep dive look at our whole entire transit system. We asked, what is going to be the best way to right-size the system to encourage more ridership. And at that time, it was really the commute rides. So we bolstered the Route 21, which goes to Sassoon and connects to Amtrak and Capitol Corridor. We bolstered the Route 29 that connects to BART. And as well as we implemented the 10X or introduced the 10X and 11X, which are express routes that connect to the Vallejo Ferry. And we took all of our local routes from kind of the longer circuitous loop routes to bidirectional routes. And we rerouted or renamed them from, 1 through 8, A through H. And so we daylighted all these changes in January of 2020, and we were seeing some positive response and ridership growth for 2.5 months until March 15th of 2020. And I'm going to turn it now over to Rebecca to explain what happened since COVID.
Thank you, Kate, for laying the stage, and for Danielle for giving us a little history. I'd actually never seen before this, one of those first pictures of the original Vine branding and such. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of what changed during COVID, right? It impacted all of us in different ways, and particularly public transit. And so what you're seeing here is the service that we had during COVID, where we essentially cut 22,000 service hours quickly in between mid-March and April. And because why did we do this? We were facing a position where we had uncertain financial future and that we rely heavily on sales tax, and we didn't know where things would go. And then obviously we saw a heavy drop in ridership with different stay-at-home orders. And then following that, subsequently, limits on the number of people that were allowed to ride our buses due to space constraints. So for example, on a 40-foot bus at different points in time, you may have only been allowed to be carrying 6 passengers. And so what did we do at that time, right? Daniela just laid out how we had been operating routes A through H in the city of Napa. And so we went from those 8 fixed routes to a completely on-demand stop-to-stop basis. So basically, people could make a request in that Ride the Vine app that we had been using in the smaller jurisdictions, or call into dispatch and go from one stop to any other stop within the city of Napa for about an 18-month period. What else did we do on our regional routes? Our routes 10 and 11 operated on a Saturday schedule, which essentially means that they did not have early morning or late night, which we would typically run on the weekdays. In terms of the commuter service, right? Commuters were no longer a big focus for us, as many people were working from home. So we discontinued at that time temporarily the Route 10X and the Route 11X. 10X, which were our express services, 11 down to the Vallejo Ferry, 10 up to Calistoga. And then in terms of the shuttles where, for example, we are operating 2, say in American Canyon or in Calistoga, we decreased to 1. And then we kind of changed the hours, especially in the evenings that were running in like the Calistogas, St. Helena's, and Yountville's. So everyone had a reduction of service. And then other things that we did with the excess drivers, right, that we had and the excess vehicles, it's like, all right, how can we play a role in the COVID emergency? And so one of the things that we did, and you'll see just one picture there of us going to the Salvation Army, but every day we would pick up breakfast, lunch, and dinner from the Salvation Army and then deliver it to a number of the quarantine sites throughout the city of Napa. And then we were working with COAD, which kind of handles emergency food operations within Napa County, and we would do deliveries of groceries to individuals living in Pope Valley, in American Canyon, and in other places throughout Napa on a twice monthly basis. And so as opposed to say before COVID, when we were bringing people to the grocery store to get food or to the food pantry to get food, kind of reversed our model and what you can see here. And then we were just trying to make sure that everyone knew about the changes, because before COVID, we might make a schedule change once a year, twice a year. But during COVID, we had to make changes much more quickly to react to the changing dynamics. And so kind of where are we now, right? We all know that the COVID state of emergency had recently ended officially, and we've been kind of back at our new normal. And so what we're operating is 4 fixed routes within the city of Napa. So the north, south, east, and west. And then we're continuing to operate stop to stop on demand in the areas that are not served by those fixed routes. So say those areas where the 4 other fixed routes were and why. We're back to on-demand service, 2 shuttles, both in Calistoga and American Canyon, but still reduced hours into the evenings in Calistoga, St. Helena, and Yountville. And then on the commuter side of things, the 11X is back, so the express to the ferry, but we have not revived the 10X. And we kind of see it as, in a way, the 11X saves you a lot of time, right? There are only 4 stops, say, on the 11X. And if you ride the 11 South, for example, there might be 26 between here and the Vallejo Ferry, for example. The 10X, kind of what that saved you is you didn't go through the town of Yountville. You would just stop at the Veterans Home, right? And then go straight to St. Helena. But otherwise, there wasn't a lot of time saving. And there was kind of the additional cost for the rider associated with the 10X. So we weren't seeing a lot of ridership on that. And we're going to go into a little bit later, and Kate had mentioned in her introduction, we had limited labor force available. So we had to make reductions appropriately. And then on the regional side of things, the 10 and the 11, which have always been kind of our main routes serving the State Route 29, they remained and went back to a weekday schedule. And if nothing else, if all else fails, we will always operate those 2. And so they continue to operate. So wanted to give a little picture to what Kate had talked about earlier, which is the Vine and kind of our slow ridership recovery, but wanted to show you that in a longer term context, not just say 19 to 20, where obviously there's that giant dip, but show you what we had been doing since fiscal year 2008, when the last National Transit Database, which is where all the transit agencies report, the last set of data that we really had. And so you'll see this increase. So why that increase, say between 2013 fiscal year and 2016 fiscal year, as we had seen kind of in the slide Danielle presented, we did make a change in terms of our fixed routes in 2013. So prior to go the length of the valley, we had 1 route that went Calistoga all the way down to the Vallejo Ferry Terminal and back. So you can imagine that was a little bit of an on-time performance nightmare. And we did break that up into the routes 10 and 11 at that time. So let's just say, for example, you were going from Calistoga down to the Vallejo Ferry. Now you'd be taking 2 trips, right? You would count, it's kind of unlinked passenger trips. So that would be 2 trips. So that was part of that. And then just the idea that we were offering better and more service as you'll see when we kind of show revenue hours, led to an increase in our ridership. And then there were larger economic factors happening as well. If you remember, there was a very high labor force participation rate at that time and low unemployment throughout Napa. So that kind of gives you the context there. And then if you're looking down, say, fiscal year 2021, which was our dip, and then where we are kind of in 22 and 23, we've been slower to recover than some of the other transit agencies. Obviously, we have the same health and safety fears that some of the others have. We're also seeing impacts, unlike, say, a rail line, right? That's not isn't impacted in the same way by congestion on the roads. As a bus service provider, we're very much impacted by congestion. And so say the Route 10, let's say it takes us 10 more minutes every day as a result of congestion. It's just less service that we can offer, kind of decreases our reliability. And then just changes in people's patterns, right? People may be still staying home more, who are still concerned about their health and safety concerns, or just got into new patterns in life. They might only be going into the office, say, 2 out of the 3 days. And then there are limits in the passengers per revenue hour that we can take on our on-demand stop-to-stop service within the city of Napa. If you think about it, it's much bigger than a Yountville or anything else. You've got basically your 9 square miles roughly of the service area that we're covering, and taking those trips takes us a lot of time. So we'll never really get above 4 passengers per revenue hour. We've had other outsized parties model that as well, and they're kind of seeing something similar. So, but the ridership picture doesn't tell the whole story, right? It's also about what service we're able to put on the roads, because we're not having the same level of service that we had, say, at that peak in fiscal year 2016 that we're having now. And that's due to our limits of labor. We obviously need a bus driver in each of our buses. And as Kate had mentioned, we have not had a full roster of bus drivers since the beginning of COVID. On any given day, say right now, we might be 2 to 3 short, which is putting us in a really good position compared to where we were before, but we can't suddenly jump from the number of service hours, say, that we had in a fiscal year 2019 tomorrow, because we just don't have the drivers to do it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Finance, Antonio Adorato, who's going to give us the financial outlook. And this financial outlook, you want to pay attention, because it's going to play into all the other kind of decisions and things we're going to discuss today that are tied to our finances.
Hello. So good morning, Chair and members of the board. My name is Antonio Honorado, and I'm the Director of Finance for the agency. So today's retreat focuses on the operations of the Vine, but in the background, we have an eye on the financial position of the agency's public transit system, and staff monitors the long-term financial health of the Vine. For this portion of the retreat, I wanted to briefly touch upon the financial outlook of the Vine. As you can see from this slide, the previous year's actual expenses came in at just over $12.2 million, composed of 4 main categories: purchase transportation, fuel, vehicle maintenance, and administration. Purchase transportation and fuel make up about 90% of the cost of delivering these services to the public. Depreciation is an accounting function and does not directly affect the operations, but it is a cost of doing business, and so it deserves an honorable mention. The last line item on the table shows a total realized cost of providing public transit services. As you can see from the second column, there is a huge jump in purchase transportation. This is because we are still restoring services from the pandemic, and includes the annual increase in the purchase transportation contract. Fuel is expected to peak this year or next, then start a downward trend. This is because the fleet will convert to electricity as a fuel source instead of diesel and unleaded. However, the data for fuel as an electrical source is severely limited to us, and so we don't exactly know what the actual savings is at this point in time. But we do expect a downward trend as our fleet converts to a zero-emission bus fleet. Maintenance is expected to flatten out and slowly decrease as well. This is the same reason as fuel. As we convert to an electric fleet, there should be less maintenance costs, as buses are newer, under warranty, and have less parts. But maintaining an aging diesel and unleaded fleet will still be costly until we can convert to a zero emission bus fleet. Also, maintenance is a function of keeping the buses in a state of good repair. Newer buses equates to less breakdowns, which equates to less costs. Lastly, administration costs is incremental and anticipated to stay relatively the same. So even though we're achieving savings in some areas, they are offset with costs modestly increasing over the next few years out. After an initial jump from the previous year to the current year, costs are expected to increase only modestly, a little less than 5% per year, as long as there are no significant changes in the structure of the Vine. At this point, I am going to hand it over to Alex Bockelman, the Deputy Executive Director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Alex will be talking about the regional efforts to revive Bay Area transit.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be with you here in Napa.
Get closer.
Okay, I need to get a little closer. Can you hear me now? All right. Good morning. My name is Alex Bockelman. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Policy. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and really, you can kind of zoom out to the regional level and really talk about the importance for Bay Area public transit and really making sure that it can survive and thrive. I mean, we really are in a crisis brought on by the pandemic. And so my presentation today will really provide information on the amount of additional support that's needed to help transit operators survive. And also importantly, talk about what MTC and the transit operators are doing in collaboration to really help public transit come back better, sort of thrive as we come out of this crisis. I guess I have the clicker, so I will, let's see. Do I just click this button?
I can click it for you if you'd like.
Okay, so you want me to just say next slide? Okay, next slide. And Laura, can you open up the entire screen so that it's easier to see and read that bar?
Yes, we will do that right now.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna take that out and then I'm gonna just go to the screen. And I'm gonna move this part. No, no.
All right. So,
Okay.
okay, great. Thank you. So I think it's important to, note that ridership wasn't trending in a particularly positive direction prior to 2020. And I think you saw a little bit of that in Rebecca's slides. But obviously the COVID pandemic really decimated ridership in a overnight, in a way that we really haven't found our way back from. But that said, transit ridership is still it still provides so many trips. Even though we're at 59% of ridership compared to pre-pandemic, that's still 22 million trips per month on average, in the last over the last 3-month period. And as you all know, transit service not only helps with congestion, but also is a lifeline for low-income residents, essential workers, and other population groups that cannot use a vehicle for various reasons. The sustained decrease in ridership, though, between pre and post pandemic is, we're finding it's not just because of remote work. I mean, obviously that's a really significant factor, but of commuters who are still going to the workplace, the share taking transit fell from 14% to 5% in 2021. So those are the folks that are, going to the office. So we hope that there's been some improvement since the last data was available in 2021. But that gap caused by commuter preference to drive rather than take transit is a key opportunity in terms of getting those riders back. Next slide. And I think it's important to note that ridership recovery continues to vary a lot by operator. Those with a very commute focused system like BART and Caltrain which were also most reliant on fares, have among the lowest rates of recovery. As you can see, the lowest rates of recovery are in the orange, reddish area there. You can also see, and you're familiar with from the last presentation, Napa Vine and other smaller operators such as the Fairfield, such as Fast in Solano County and West Cat in the East Bay, have also seen sluggish return of riders with only 30 to 60% of pre-COVID ridership, depending on which of those operators. So there's significant variation across the region in terms of getting riders back. Next slide. In terms of external factors that are making the financial picture and business model bleak, the Bay Area has the lowest rate of office in-person occupancy. And so that's not really a distinction that's great for transit. The Bay Area is also seeing population loss with 150,000 fewer people than lived here in 2015. And before the pandemic, a UCLA study found that transit ridership in the Bay Area, which did look like it was increasing, was really bolstered by trips that were going in and out of San Francisco. And so I think the picture that you saw from Rebecca about the Vine seeing decreases, that was actually being seen on a lot of operators throughout the region. But it looked like we were seeing growing ridership because trips in and out of San Francisco in particular were still growing. The chart also shows that cities such as New York, Miami, and Los Angeles have seen a much stronger downtown recovery rate. So, we do have a challenged business model when it comes to transit right now, and it's definitely externally exacerbated. Next slide. At the regional level, we asked all of the operators to do reimagined short-range transit plans, and those were finalized in February. These reimagined short-range transit plans took a scenario approach, given that what we have definitely learned in the last several years is that we don't know what the future holds for us, and we cannot predict the future. The findings were quite disparate across systems in terms of fiscal and operating challenges. But there were some key themes. One of them I just highlighted, that fare box dependent riders remain especially vulnerable to sluggish ridership recovery. We also found that even if we had all of the revenues that we had pre-pandemic, which we do not, that would not likely be sufficient to return to the service levels that we had pre-pandemic. And that is because of the cost pressures that we are all seeing with inflation. So it would really cost more to put the same level of service out on the street. And then, importantly, and you all know this, is that, in terms of putting service on the street, one of the most significant challenges is really operator shortages and recruitment and retention. So those are a significant barrier to service level increases across the region. Next slide. And in terms of, the crux of the problem, which I think this really illustrates, and Chair Pedroza mentioned it at the beginning, Bay Area transit operators cumulatively are reporting projected operating shortfalls that total $2.5 billion over the next 5 years. The shortfalls in the coming year are, pretty modest because we still have a lot of COVID relief funds. But as those funds run out, you see the deficits really grow into fiscal year 25. And then as some of our larger operators and fare dependent operators run out of money, then these deficits could swell to almost 800 million in the following years if we're not able to get additional support. The majority of the shortfall is with two systems, BART and Muni, which carry about 2/3 of the region's riders and also represent about 2/3 of the funding shortfall. And these shortfalls are really what would be needed to meet current service levels and commitments. So we really would need more money to attract more riders. Next slide. So I want to touch briefly on sort of MTC and partner stakeholder advocacy in hopes of securing state transit recovery funds. We think that the case for why the state should step up There's many reasons, but one of them is to protect the existing investment that the state has made. You know, they have been a key investor in our transit system, having invested $6.5 billion, expanding Bay Area's transit network over the last 2 decades. But as Kate noted, they have provided little support in terms of operations compared to states with similar states with robust transit systems. Congress, by contrast, really stepped up in a big way, helping to keep service running in the Bay Area, infusing over $4.4 billion in COVID relief funds that our operators are still using to keep their systems going during this time. Lastly, I think, and most importantly, in terms of the case to the state for why to help keep transit and help it survive, is that you know, it's foundational to the state's climate and equity goals. You know, in terms of if California wants to be a state that leads on climate change, we cannot let our transit system collapse. We also cannot be leading on equity and showing how we're taking care of our most vulnerable populations if we slash transit service, which is used disproportionately by low-income residents, people of color, and renters. Next slide. So some of the key concepts guiding the state ask is really, you know, we are seeking new funding to help transit in this period of time. But really, the ask is minimizing any requests of general fund, given the significant deficits the state is facing, which was made more dire with the May revision estimates that just came out. We also are wanting to show that transit has skin in the game and is willing to make hard choices, sometimes even having to flex capital money to operating. I think that's an important message to the state, and really trying to prioritize monies that will make sure that these systems survive, but also looking for monies that can help them thrive and attract more riders. And really, in terms of the discussions with the legislature, really providing a menu of options. They have very difficult choices ahead of them as they try to close the budget deficit and also make sure that transit survives. Next slide. So I want to shift now to what the Bay Area is doing together to improve on transit. The region convened a Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force in 2020 and 2021. It was a year-long effort that really culminated in the adoption of a transit transformation action plan. And as Chair Pedroza likes to say, the action plan is really anchored in outcomes. And there are 5 key outcomes that would guides this work and really thinks about striving for a thriving transit network. The first outcome is really in the area of fares and payments, which is focused on simpler, consistent, and equitable fare payment options. The second outcome is focused on customer information and making transit easier to navigate and more convenient. The third outcome is focused on working towards a transit system that is managed as a unified, efficient, and reliable network. The fourth is really around an emphasis on accessibility, coordinating transit services more efficiently for older adults, people with disabilities, and those with lower incomes is a high priority to be elevated. And lastly, funding is obviously integral to the system, emphasizing using resources more efficiently and also securing new dedicated revenues to meet our funding needs. Next slide. The next slides are just some quick updates on actions that we're taking to really deliver and implement this action plan. And each of the initiatives that you see here are being delivered in close partnership with the transit operators. Under the first outcome, we are advancing the fare coordination integration efforts, which include 2 pilots. One is the Clipper Bay Pass pilot, and also a second one, which is the no cost and reduced interagency transfer pilot. The second outcome, we're advancing mapping and wayfinding, and key features of that work include system design, an underlying digital mapping service platform, and sub-regional pilots. Next slide. I think one of the, marquees efforts in terms of coordination is the Clipper Start program. It does provide reduced fares for riders with lower incomes. And it was actually underway prior to the pandemic, but it was actually launched with just 4 operators in the region. But during the pandemic, I think all the operators recognized that people that were still riding the system were those the most essential workers, and many of them in lower wage jobs. And so what we saw was all of the operators, actually, except for one, I'm still trying to get them aboard. All the operators in the region during the pandemic actually joined the Clipper Start program. I think really demonstrating that this could be a tool that could help our most low income riders. Okay, I just in, Napa Vine is now at 50%. And we actually are, many of the operators are moving from the 20% to 50%. And as I noted, the one operator that isn't here, which is all the way to the south in the region, the Valley Transportation Authority, we're having conversations with them to get them to join, because I think it's really important that someone can sign up once and then they get this benefit, hopefully a 50% off on all of the systems in the region. And that's especially important for those that might have to transfer between 2 systems. We hope that no one's transferring among 27 systems for one trip, but I think often there is at least one transfer. This is currently a 3-year pilot. We are going to be asking the commission to extend the program in the coming months. And as I said, we're really working to get this benefit in the hands of more people, simplify it by hopefully having more operators move to the 50% column and get all operators on board. Next slide. Another pilot that we launched recently is the Clipper Bay Pass. And this is a pass that allows, it's a regional transit pass for unlimited rides on all bus, rail, and ferry services in the Bay Area. Phase 1 of the pilot was launched in 2022, and it was at select universities and affordable housing properties. We have about 50,000 students that are participating. And the reason that we selected certain locations were, we were trying to have geographic diversity, but we also were targeting areas that already had an existing one system pass. And that was actually so that we could have a little bit of a control as we launched this pilot. Next slide. So, as I said, in each of the places we've launched this in terms of the universities, such as Santa Rosa City College, UC Berkeley, San Francisco State, about a quarter of the students have one agency pass, and then, a quarter of the students have the Clipper Bay Pass where they can ride any system. And the other students have a one transit system pass. And what we've seen are really promising results. We've seen that those with a Clipper Bay Pass have taken 35% more trips in comparison to students with the existing single agency pass. So the initial results show that the Clipper Bay Pass may be a very powerful tool to make transit work for more trips for more people. So the work ahead is how to continue the pilot and set the stage to take the product to scale at the right time in close collaboration with our partners. Next slide. Another pilot that we're working on is a no cost and reduced cost pilot. And that would allow, when someone's making a trip that requires a transfer between participating transit agencies, they'll only pay the full fare on just the first agency that they use. And any transfer to another agency will be free up to the per transfer limit, which is about $2.50. So the program is planned for rollout in 2024 with the launch of the next generation Clipper fare payment system. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier, another thing we're trying to do is really make sort of the wayfinding much more seamless for the customer. And this mapping and wayfinding project will provide the Bay Area with a unified mapping and wayfinding system for public transit and surrounding areas. That will allow a coordinated identity and visual language to simplify the understanding of regional transit connectivity. We'll also have specific design and elements, such as audible, tactile, and digital that reduce barriers related to accessibility and equity. Next slide. So this mapping and wayfinding initiative actually also was underway pre-COVID in 2017, but I think the work coming out of the Transformation Action Plan was to accelerate this work. We did conduct a business case, which really showed that there is, if we can have a common transit information brand and implement standardized mapping information and signage at all transit environments, that would actually provide the greatest strategic benefits, strongest incremental revenue generation potential, and the highest return on investment. So we are trying to accelerate the work and moving to rollout of sub-regional pilots in as soon as possible. Next slide. In terms of other actions, one of the other key areas is around transit, the transit network. In this area, we're advancing specific transit priority efforts so that people are not sitting in the bus stuck in traffic. So that's very important if transit's going to be attractive to more customers. We're also implementing a regional network management structure and also working with the transit operators on a transit network plan, which we're calling Transit 2050 Plus. And lastly, advancing real-time data standard efforts, all with the idea of making the system more seamless and attractive for the customer. Next slide. I think Chair Pedroza highlighted this also in his talking points, that in February, the Commission approved a regional network management framework, and we're currently working towards implementation. There are a few, elements that anchor this work. The mission statement is to drive transformative improvements in the customer experience for Bay Area Regional Transit. And really, this structure is meant to formalize the collaboration that really started a lot during the pandemic, of people coming together and really having a structure to formalize that and keep moving on these initiatives. It would create a new committee of the Commission that would be focused on regional network management. And that committee would not only have commissioners from MTC, but would also include 2 transit agency board members and 1 state representative. And it would also, the committee would be guided by recommendations that would come from a council that would be comprised of transit agency general managers. And importantly, also, there would be a voice of the customer body to make sure that we are always grounding our work in what is best for the customer. Next slide. So this is sort of the last slide on the updates on actions. As I mentioned, another key area is accessibility, and we are advancing our paratransit eligibility standards through our coordinated plan. We're also, a key feature of the next generation Clipper is making sure that we're integrating paratransit fares, and we've recently awarded a contract to move to advance that and make sure that that's moving quickly. With respect to funding, as I opened, I think this is an hour by hour. There's a lot of focus on addressing the fiscal cliff and financial sustainability. Also, since 2021, MTC has been engaging with stakeholders to address immediate and near-term financial support, as well as really laying the groundwork for longer-term revenue solutions with enabling legislation for a future transportation measure. Next and last slide. So, and last but not least, what is the long-term plan for transit to transition to financial sustainable business model? This is obviously very much of an oversimplification of the work underway in the region. But this year, we're really implementing elements of the Transformation Action Plan, starting with early pilots that are already underway. We're standing up network management this summer. By 2025, we'll have completed the Transit 2050 Plus connected network plan. And by 2026, we hope to go to the ballot with a regional transportation measure that will include funding for transit operations. And by 2028, we hope that many of the Transformation Action Plan initiatives will be yielding ridership benefits and helping to close the deficits across the board. And with that, I will conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Alex. I do want to offer any board members to ask any questions. This is a good time. We appreciate you being here. The presentation was very, very helpful for me in particular. But are there any questions from the board? Yes, Director Gregory.
Thank you. One thing I was hoping to hear from Mr. Honorado was the revenue side. Real curious how fares fit into the overall budget, how important those are to the mix. I think that's good context.
So, so prior to the pandemic, fares on our system composed about 15% of our operating budget. So we, as a transit agency, as a transit operator, we're not dependent on fares as much as one of the larger operators such as Caltrain or BART. Right now, fares are coming in at about 5% overall, which is, we still have a big gap if we want to go back up to the 15% where we were before the pandemic. So, but as a part of our operations, fares are less reliant. We are less reliant on fares than we are on federal and state operating funds.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good question, and thank you for that response. Any other questions?
Just
Yes.
curious about the downward trend from 2016 to 2019, and if whatever happened during that period also plays a role in decreased ridership. I know that particularly here in Napa Valley, but I don't know if that is a similar trend elsewhere in the Bay Area. And what kinds of findings have we made with that period of time until we got to the pandemic, if you know, or anyone else?
Yeah, so Kate and I are trying to we're trying
No, I
to.
apologize for that question.
That's a good question.
That's
You
not a gotcha.
stumped the experts here.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point because as I said, I think the trends that Rebecca showed for Napa Vine was happening for a lot of our bus operators across the region, but our regional trend was still going up, like propped up by a lot of trips into San Francisco. So I think there were various reasons. I think that a lot of, there were changes that led to driving being more available to more people. I think there were also things around kind of housing that were, in terms of where people were living and working was changing, and then transit maybe wasn't working as well for them. So there were sort of the housing challenges that we had were maybe some people who had been taking buses in the more core of the region now were living further, and maybe there wasn't as much bus service, and then they had to get a car. I don't know. It was complicated, and I'll let Kate add too.
Well, there was a couple of things that were going on. There was also a huge increase in subprime auto loans available to low-income people. And I think that probably affected some of the outer regions a little bit more than the inner regions. And I think we all suspected that a little bit it was going to be Uber and Lyft. And I don't think that actually had a huge impact, but it did impact downtown San Francisco. So people who were taking trips within the city, typically before the Uber and Lyft boom, started taking more TNCs.
And look, Paul, I think that's a great question. What I'll add too, we've seen some articles about the migration effect of people moving to Sonoma, Solano, Yolo County. And then you look at that layered with where the jobs are being created, that's a future transportation issue, opportunity or challenge. I don't think the dust has settled down yet to fully understand what that means for our community, right? I think you're seeing the telework impact. That's what's happening in San Francisco, but there's a lot of movement. People did move to different communities. And that's what we're trying to figure out in terms of what the future trend may be. The concerning part for us is, we're investing millions and billions of dollars in capital projects for what we know today, right? And you have to make sure that these projects are still beneficial today and for the future. So it's an interesting time, but a lot of it is the type of data collection we're trying to gather. So
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, I mean, that is a huge point, and that is some of the challenges that we have. You know, we end up responding using transit to respond to land use changes and job market changes instead of like planning so that we can really improve transit ridership. So, but also, I would just, one other thing is that we were recovering from a worldwide recession, and the job market was going up at, you know, after the bottom of the recession, we had more and more employment, and that employment then also offered people the ability to buy cars and then to get to their jobs that way. So there was I think a number of reasons, and you know, I think it's hard for us to respond quickly to changes like that. And that really is what prompted us to do our operational, comprehensive operational analysis to really get at what was going on specifically in Napa.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of shift. We saw a lot of shift, both in the marketplace and housing that was brought up, and it's a ripple effect, you know. And as you said, the recession and then COVID, there's just so much happening. Yeah, it's not like even ground or stable ground to try to navigate and make these big multi-million dollar decisions on infrastructure and planning. Vice Chair?
Yes, I wanted to actually follow up on Paul's, no, on not Paul, but actually Director Gregory's comment on fare box recoveries. Currently, I think, even though we're at 5% instead of 15, I think the state has, you know, given us a pass as far as meeting the 15%. Assuming that goes away, if I understand it, it's the local jurisdiction who has to make up the difference between whatever our fare box recovery is and the 15%. Is that going to come back into effect? And that has an impact at the local level, because suddenly we're providing more of a subsidy to public transit, ironically, than maybe the state itself, which seems wrong. But
yeah, so for the local jurisdictions, so that's a great question. So for the local jurisdictions, our agreement with the local jurisdictions is we have a fare box recovery where for American Canyon, it's 15%. For the non-urbanized areas, Yountville, St. Helena, and Calistoga, it's 10%. And the reason why there's a difference is because American Canyon is considered urban and the Up Valley is considered not. So, but our agreement with the local jurisdictions is the cities and the town will fill in that gap. That's an agreement on the local level, not on the state level. On the state level, the Transportation Development Act determines the fare box ratio, and for NVTA, for the Vine, that is 15%. So there is talk about TDA reform and waiving the requirement for yet another year for the current year. So those are ongoing discussions, and NVTA and MTC are advocates of at least waiving the fare box recovery ratio for at least another year while the state legislature makes certain refinements to the statute. But to answer your question is basically, yes, the local jurisdictions are obligated to make up that deficit between.
And then the follow-up to that is, while we're at 5% instead of 15, if the local jurisdictions aren't making that up and the state isn't making that up, then that's cutting into our TDA budget, right?
That is, yeah. The funding has to come from somewhere, from operations.
So it's a bad news no matter how you look at it. It just depends
it's a struggle. It's a struggle. Identifying, and funding from TDA to fill in that gap means funding for other projects may be deferred or delayed. So that is a concern of ours.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Yes, Director Garcia.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, during the pandemic, we had a lot of remote working, and now that it's ceased, how much of that is returned to workforce in the model that we had before? You know, the commuting into work. I know what point was made here by people relocating in the area. My connection to the real estate world tells me, she tells me that the markets went up for housing considerable during that time. For what you're paying for a studio apartment in San Francisco, you can buy a house, say, for example, in Napa County and work remotely. And that certainly, I think that has a impact on the commute pattern of people. Do we know how many have now back working full time? For example, some corporations have a 3-day work return policy. So I think that whole process has had an impact on the model we're trying to recreate, but it's have to be based on that type of data. And I don't know how much is that changing, by the way. Is more people going back full time, meaning 5 days a week? Something to follow. Anyway, just thought I'd share that thought.
Through the chair.
Yes, please. Thank you,
So
Alex.
I don't have the Napa specific data on that. So I think that would be really important because I do think that there is big variations. But just in terms of what we do know, I mean, the Bay Area Council and other groups have been doing weekly or monthly surveys. And so, we're seeing that the data from month to month is starting to be more stable. So maybe we're getting to a new normal, but we are seeing a lot of continued remote work, but we're also seeing a lot more, there are a lot of people that are coming into the office 2 to 3 days a week now. But I can get you the numbers, but I don't have them and I don't want to give you the wrong numbers, but I can certainly get that to you. We are tracking that monthly. But we're seeing that there aren't a lot of, at least the employers, the Bay Area Council are tracking. There's not a lot of, 100% back in the office. That's a much slower number, but then 100% remote is a lower number. And then you've got a lot in the 2 to 3 days a week, which I think is hard for some of our transit operators to, they can't change their schedule. So they have to run the same schedule, but they're only providing for, a few days a week. So we can get you the data, but I don't have it.
I was just curious to what the trend was going to. Seems like we're in a state of flux between what we had pandemic, but a lot of remote work and part of it going back into work. And then we have people relocated. And I'm sure some of them are finding an alternate way to get to work other than transit.
So I guess for Napa, only about 15% of our service was commuter service. And we probably are seeing a little bit of, pretty stable on our commuter service compared to our other service. The big weird thing that's going on in Napa is that we're probably doing now more trips than we were doing before the pandemic, but there are people working from home doing multiple errands during the day. So our traffic congestion is terrible and our ability to actually serve them is being compromised by the amount of traffic on the street. So that is an ongoing problem for us. And then I would just say, as a person who does typically take transit when I'm going to the city or Oakland, that parking is really abundant because of people working from home, right? So because of that, I think more people are also driving long distances. And maybe we need to come up with transit supported parking policies that really start charging people the real cost of parking.
I noticed that I took part into ABAC meeting. I usually go to El Cerrito Drive and take part in.
Director Garcia, will you go ahead and talk into your mic, please?
Thank you. Taking BART from El Cerrito to San Francisco. There's all kinds of parking. Typically, there's none. It's really hard to find parking, and depending on the time of day. So yeah, I noticed that too.
Director Pedrosa, did you want to say something?
Yes, and I agree with kind of Director Miller's comments about, looking at parking and looking at all the solutions. These are hard decisions that we have to make. But if we do want to shift behavior, and when you layer with some of our climate goals, right, us driving our individual cars is not going to be the solution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it's going to hurt a little bit in all areas. But the comment I wanted to make, we got kind of an overview of demographic trends in Napa County from Director Morrison. And one of the areas that is fastest growing is our senior community, our senior population. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about the needs of public transit, there is an opportunity. We know we're getting older as a community. We're seeing our school enrollment decline. These are precursors of where we might have to change. And I'm not casting judgment on our community getting older. It's a fact. but we could be part of the
You're
solution.
part of that community that's getting older.
Yeah, I am. Trust me.
It's a fact.
Supervisor Greger and I talk about it a lot. You know, it doesn't matter that I'm the most senior member. It doesn't matter. It's a number. But the point is, I think we have an opportunity to envision the future and what that means. And we've been hearing, we've been meeting with folks who talk about the need to go to a doctor's appointment, the need to run errands, and them looking at transportation as a critical need for a quality of life that we all want for Napa residents. So to me, those are some of the things that as we kind of move forward to the next kind of segment of how do we envision the future and what role do we want to play, right? We know where our community is heading. So to me, it's an exciting time to be part of this organization, but it means we have to make tough decisions too, right?
Yeah. And that's a really good point. If I have the data correct, I believe the senior population, older adult population is increasing by 16%, while our student and youth population is decreasing by 10%. And I don't have the chart with me, but I know our school system can provide that. This is a public health issue. Also, they provide that as they look at our old population and vulnerable communities. I know we've got Deborah behind me, and I can feel her saying, yes, that's true. She's the director of Molly's Angels and all the work that they're doing in transportation for people to doctor's appointments in particular. And so good points. I do have a question. There's two things that popped out. One is that the recovery for Marin Transit is at 85%, while Napa we're just over 30%. And I don't know their transit system, but that disparity, because sometimes I look at Napa and I look at Marin and I see some comparisons, but I understand but maybe not in transit. So illuminate what that is.
I would say that they have a much, much higher rate of transit dependent riders than we do. They're almost, when I say I'm going to ballpark it, but I think it's around 70%. And for us, it's more like 40% when we were, and that was on the high side. So that's
what creates a transit dependent rider? Is that
it's mostly elderly people in Marin that are using the transit system. Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question is, are we able to track the time and financial cost savings by being on transit? I think, when it comes down to personal choice for people, it's about their time and the money. So how much time can they save and how much money can they save on an annual basis by taking transit? Now, I know we're kind of like in this upside kind of catch-22 situation. If we could start promoting that and showing some really good tangibles and outcomes, maybe we can shift the culture a little bit too.
It's a very good point. I would say that we're always going to be challenged on time because we operate on the same streets and have to use the same lanes as cars do. And that's an ongoing challenge. I know MTC is working on making, the state is working on with the state of California, Caltrans, to identify ways that we can make transit operate better on our highways and freeways. But on our local streets, it's really constrained, as you know. The savings is really easy to calculate. So that's something that maybe we can engage and use for our marketing approach. It's certainly something that we use for our travel demand management program, is how much money people can save by using an alternative commute mode.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I would just add, when we did this transformation action plan, I think we heard, especially from Chair Pedroza and a few of other commissioners, is transit priority is sort of the top three. How do we make transit priority work? And that's really gets at what you're talking about, is how do we make it so that if you're in a bus, you get it already if you're in a rail car. But anyways, if you're on a bus, how do you feel that you're going to get there faster? And where we have done priority treatments in different ways on certain corridors, we have measured and we have seen the time savings before and after. And we also, I was just in a meeting with Jeff Tumlin. He's the general manager of Muni, and they just finished a big project in the last year on Van Ness. And there's huge time savings for the passenger, but what's really remarkable is while their overall system has only seen a return of about 60% of the riders, on that line, they're at over 100% of the riders that they used to have. So, customers will come if they get a time advantage. If they're,
Right.
it has to be there. We're seeing the same thing on some lines at AC Transit and in the South Bay Valley Transportation Authority. We've done before and after in terms of the travel time savings. You can see it. And then you see that those are the lines that actually have, gotten close to back to pre-pandemic ridership, whereas the rest of the system is, much lower. So
Yeah.
if you provide
That
a
needs
good
to be that
service-
direct benefit, that direct experiential benefit and gain. And I know with Napa, the challenge is that we're in this catch-22, we're in this financial deficit and heading to the cliff. And yet this is a time that we need more money to invest in the system than ever. So not only do we need the safety net funds to support the current situation, but we need to invest in transit to really make the difference. So it's a tough predicament that we're in. I think, okay. Yes, Director Mueller.
Okay, so I'm going to go and kind of go back to finances. It seems like we've got a bit of a theme here. So I really appreciate all the fare box, but I'm a little struck by first the financial outlook that we have here. This is the operating expenses. I really didn't see any revenues. I'm just, I know we're going to be very dependent on state, which makes me very nervous, and federal funds, which I know very little about. But is this something that we need to take a look at as this board during a retreat or some kind of a future meeting and either decide, do we need to do something, or we just like hope for the best, or thoughts?
Well, I think always during budget time is a good time for the board to give us feedback on the approach for the 2-year cycle that the budget is attempting to address. Our two main fund sources are Federal Transit Association funds, and they have been very stable. And then Transportation Development Act funds, which is a 1/4-cent sales tax statewide. And we receive the funds that are generated in Napa. And that has also been very stable. Unfortunately, those funds aren't growing at the rate of our costs. Our other resources are fares, as Tony mentioned, but we also get money from advertising. And then we get funds from the small jurisdictions to help us with fare box in the 4 small jurisdictions: Yountville, American Canyon, St. Helena, and Calistoga. So they have been very stable. And I think the fiscal cliff is a problem for us if we really want to bring back the service the way it was before. If we want to just do what we're doing, then the fiscal cliff isn't an issue. But we have, as Alex pointed out, regionally, and I have been very involved in this, in pushing the state to provide us fund sources to address this gap, to figure out what it is that we're going to be doing in the future, to understand really what the new norm is. So I think the balance of today's session is Rebecca proposing service expansion, and to get your feedback on that. And that's also an opportunity for you to weigh in on the costs. The other thing that we're doing to reduce costs is that we are the beneficiary of $20 million in Region Measure 3 funds. We advanced those funds as part of a letter of no prejudice process with MTC. And we're going to use a lot of those funds to pay off the debt for the maintenance facility, so that we make sure that we have a good operating buffer, because the cost of paying that debt down is going to be about $1 million a year, and we want to make that a little bit smaller. So there are some cost measures that we are implementing. But look, the ongoing challenge is that we're not able to pay our drivers enough to be here in an environment where the cost of housing and the availability of housing is always a challenge. So we need to figure that out if we're really going to be putting service back on the street in a way that makes the Vine system viable again. It's a long answer to your question, but yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a good segue to the next section. What can we do differently?
Sure. So what we were going to planning on doing before that is we'll take a 10-minute break. So right now it's about 10:30. So we can reconvene at 10:40. We'll kind of touch on the meat of things and more like what we can do in this next fiscal year and then in fiscal years beyond. So stay tuned and we'll see you at 10:40.
Madam, restrooms are outside the double doors and to the left. So, yeah, so.
Am I on? Hey, everyone. I'd like to thank you for taking that break in the lively discussion. If we could have everyone kind of come back to their seats, we're going to go ahead and start the second part of the presentation. Thank you.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead and have a seat.
What's up with that?
Yes.
We can snack on something.
Yeah, I used to, staff it.
We're just making sure. Let's see what you got.
Sure. Well, open the downstairs. Yeah, that's the reason. So that'd be about 200 cars off the road. Employers and have it convenient. Shuttle.
She just cleaned up so she can.
I'm guessing.
She said.
That thing in the middle.
Okay, we're going to get started here. Thank you so much. Right, Rebecca?
Perfect. Thanks. So great. So we've heard a lot about the fiscal cliff and about where our ridership stands, et cetera. But I think there really are things that we can do in this next fiscal year and beyond. So we've basically broken this out into two things, both promises and opportunities. So promises is what we're going to first touch on, and the 4 promises are listed here, things that we could do in the next fiscal year that we want to give you more detail on and discuss in greater detail. So on the first front is marketing and customer service, right? What can we do? What can we do to look more like we did prior to the pandemic? So basically want to commit to doing one event per year one event per week, and across these variety of areas. For senior events, for example, concentrating on the Napa Valley Senior Center, on the Rianda House, on the American Canyon Senior Center events that are already happening that we can attend. On the college and NVUSD front, really handling twice a year, focusing on August, the return to school, and January, kind of that second return for break. Also in terms of the farmers markets, whether it's in St. Helena, Napa, et cetera, doing that on a twice a year basis, and keeping up a regular schedule on our customer satisfaction survey, which we recently did a version of that Libby's going to present on today. And then looking really at kind of doing more general public surveys as well to try to see, okay, not only say with the customer satisfaction surveys, we'll be looking at the people on the bus, but those who are not on the bus and what else we have to do. And then kind of something on here that I think that is new and that we haven't been doing as much in the past is really targeted Spanish outreach. Right now, we have kind of a contracted temporary part-time position that we'll be advertising next week for someone that would work, say, 20 hours and help us go out more in the community. We often use a Spanish speaker, say, from TransDev staff, from customer service, but if it means that they're not in customer service answering the phones when they're out at events. So someone that will be really dedicated to that. All you have to go to is, say, a Napa County Office of Education adult event, and then you see that, okay, they might ask me one question as they're working on their English about the transit system. But if they get Olga next to me, they might ask her 6 or 7 questions, right? They're more comfortable. And I think that's an outreach session that we really need to do. The second kind of promise fits into service with limited disruptions. So this consistency. So we've talked about our labor shortage, both on the local level, and Alex talked about it on the regional level. And we had an inconsistency with our number of missed trips due to staff shortages, but kind of happy to report in that January, February, March timeframe, we really got this down to below 20 missed trips. It looks like April will play out correspondingly, and we'll kind of commit to keeping the number of missed trips at lower than 10. And I think we have the staffing right now to do that. But right, we don't want to expand again to a point where that would be problematic. The next promise that we have is related to partnerships, right? So one thing that has changed, there's been an amendment, and it's AB 185, where different school districts have to have a transportation plan and they have to include their transit agencies as a stakeholder. So you'll see the districts there, and they're all required to have one of these. And we're really in the planning stages right now with the school districts, particularly in St. Helena and in NVUSD, that the school district might be able to pay a fee for their students to ride for free on the Vine system. Thus far, the St. Helena School District has purchased passes for their students that they're distributing for the Route 10, and they're looking at options potentially for the fall as it relates to the St. Helena shuttle. And so that helps us, I guess, really twofold, right, in terms of that would drive ridership if they know they can ride, and it also gets students used to transit and how does this work? And then that's a pattern that could carry on to adulthood. We'll also look at partnerships at the college, which I'm going to touch on a little bit more. And the next slide, wine and hospitality, right? Trying to do more regular meetings, say with the Napa Valley Vintners Green Committee, and doing mapping, for example, on the Route 10, because it's remarkable how many wineries that you can go to just on the Route 10, for example, and making that known to the visitors within Napa. And then finally, on the emerging technologies front and additional partnerships, we're looking to supplement service with transportation network companies, really with support from the City of Napa, from Visit Napa Valley, and the Downtown Napa Association for service later into the evenings, particularly on the weekend nights. So for example, in a Yountville today or in a Calistoga today, you could ride on Friday and Saturday on that on-demand service up to 9 p.m. Service in the City of Napa, right, ends at 6 p.m. So obviously, if you have any type of hospitality job, you might get there, but would not be able to get home. So looking at those options to supplement our service into the evening. And as I mentioned, I'd get a little more into the Napa Valley College. If you remember, when the board met 1 month ago, you did approve a contract to do design work for this new stop at the Napa Valley College. I think there were some questions about its location, et cetera. So this is going to be my best attempt at explaining that location. So what you're going to see here is the existing stop, and it's kind of shown there with the lights. It's quite a nice picture. And that's what you have. And so, as I mentioned then, and I think Grant talked about in his presentation, the bus stops there, both going northbound and southbound. And in this case, it would continue to be the southbound stop, but northbound, and it's kind of outlined there in turquoise, there'd be new bus pull-ins. And that would be where the bus would now be stopping northbound. And so it's extremely efficient for us. And people would have the option of, say, waiting at the existing stop and coming across the pedestrian crossing there, or they could be sitting, there's a short wall, basically where you see the outline of teal, where they could be waiting until the bus came going northbound. Also negate any confusion, say, of that freshman who might get on the bus thinking, oh, the bus is pointing southbound and it'll go to American Canyon, but it really circles and goes north to Napa. So we are very excited to be doing the design on this and hope to be in construction in about a year period on this. And it's a big change in that we've had this design since 2014, and only now is the college on board. So we're excited about that and thank them very much. So main focus right now also is expanded service within the city of Napa. So kind of why the city of Napa? And first off, they obviously have the largest population. They have the most density there along some of their major corridors, and for the fact that they had the biggest service cuts, right? And so we need to focus on some restoration of service on that front. And so why does this matter, right? If you're, representing obviously Yountville or representing Calistoga, my kind of examples are, let's just say you're coming from Calistoga, you want to go to your eye appointment at Clinical Lay, which is in south of Napa. If I have the Route 10, right, that gets you to basically a few locations in Napa, but not everywhere. If you're going to that eye appointment at Clinical Lay there by the South Napa Marketplace, right, you need robust service. And you'll take the Route 10, for example, to the transit center, but then you need the Route S in that case to get you there, and kind of vice versa. Same deal if you were coming from, say, American Canyon to, say, a senior center event in Napa. Again, you need to make that transfer from that regional line to that local line. So that's kind of why it's important. One caveat before we go into the details on the three options is just what are on-demand wait times look like in the city of Napa right now. And so it's fluctuated over time, but at the moment we are way too high, especially at that 8 to 9 and 3 to 4 p.m. time period. And we don't necessarily have enough additional buses that we could put at it along with drivers. And so we need to find a way to meet this additional demand with fixed routes. And these are some of the options we're going to present. So our first option here in terms of local routes, so just to orient you, we're using Remix to make these maps, which is one of those planning softwares that we got in the 2017 timeframe. But here, all of the existing routes that serve the city of Napa are shown in black. And then kind of like the two new routes we're proposing, so essentially to go from 4 fixed routes in the city of Napa to 6, or we're calling Vintage at Salvador, which mimics here what our Route H had done in that period of time in early 2020. We think this is key, and that it would give you service both to Clinical Lay there in Napa, as well as up to Vintage High and Salvador, and fits with what I had talked about before in terms of new partnerships with NVUSD in promoting ridership among their high school students in one of their 2 major high schools there at Vintage. And then the other route would be what we're calling Napa Pipe in this case. It mirrors what had been the Route F in some ways, and then it comes down Coombs, where we're seeing a lot of on-demand demand from those riders, and then goes down and basically serves a few other purposes too, in that it would go by the college. So if you are, for example, living west of the river in the city of Napa, it's kind of easy to get there as the crow flies, but not easier to get there on the bus. And so this might give you a 1-seat ride, for example, if you were boarding along Coombs, and then it would do a loop down to Health and Human Services. So this is something that has really been an issue since they had relocated from Old Sonoma Road in about the 2016-17 timeframe down to that close to where we are today, in that we have every hour service there, but having this every hour service on this Napa Pipe route, right, with the Route 11 would essentially, if they're offset from one another, give you every 30-minute service. And so that would be another advantage to this. But what would happen really to this on-demand stop to stop, and that they would be really relegated to 2 areas. And I'm just going to point them on the map so that it's easier. So both Browns Valley and Calistoga there, or Browns Valley, sorry, and California there would not have a fixed route. And so they would have on-demand service to move anywhere along that route, or they could go to either the Saskell Gateway Transit Center or the Redwood Park and Ride to make a transfer, but they could not go to, say, any stop within the system. And kind of the reasoning for that would be to keep these on-demand wait times low and to just get them exactly where they would need to go to make the transfer to a fixed route. And so we would also be making some changes on the regional side. If you remember that Route 10, we did not restore the Route 10X, but as an alternative in this case, we would add 4 additional round trips on weekdays to the Route 10. No change in commuter service, no change to the shuttles. So that's option 1. Option 2, which you'll see here, basically same story, except for in this case, we would have on demand from any stop not served by a fixed route to another route. Any other stop in the system. Kind of the downside to this is, right, you need more buses to keep and more drivers to keep the on-demand wait time reasonable. And as we saw on the first slide, we're having a hard time doing that in our current condition. And then option 3 basically looks at restoring our routes A through H, which we had studied for pretty much a 2-year period, but only got to implement for a 2-month period in the beginning of January and February and part of March of 2020. So this would be restoring 8 fixed routes. And so before I kind of show you what this means financially, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Libby Payen, and she's going to talk through our most recent rider satisfaction survey to give you some more information on what riders are thinking.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Libby Payne, transit planner, and I'm here to provide you an update on a recent customer satisfaction survey that was just completed that will hopefully help you guide along the way today as we go over the Vine transit system. Really want to bring in the perspective of riders as we talk about all these future opportunities. So the survey ran from March 22nd to April 20th, so about a month. It was available both online and on paper in English and Spanish. Paper applications were located inside of the buses where we provided writing utensils for riders to take the survey and then had bins to then collect those responses. Of the 106 total responses we received, a little over half of them were paper responses versus those who took it online. Nearly 3/4 of the responses were in English and 1/4 were in Spanish. And it's worth noting that there was only 1 Spanish online survey received. So I think that tells us that there seems to be a preference for Spanish speakers to take paper surveys versus going online. So in terms of how we got the word out about this survey, we did it via multiple channels. We promoted on our social media pages. We sent out a news release, and there was a big yellow alert bar on the top of our Vine Transit website asking riders, hey, take our survey. So they could click that and be linked to take it online. And then, as I mentioned, there were the paper surveys and the bins were located at the front of the bus. So a rider would board and subsequently see it right there so that they could take it, as they're on Route 11 and have some time. So the moment you've been waiting for, what are the results of this survey? So there were 6 questions overall, pretty brief. And the first question we asked is, how often do you ride the bus? And the majority of our respondents frequently take the bus. Only 21% answered either a few times a year or rarely. So we really seem to have captured a lot of riders that take it on a very routine basis. Also note that this question was mandatory to respond to, meaning that those who took it online, they couldn't skip this one. Question 2, also mandatory. It was not skippable online. Obviously, with the paper survey, you could always skip it, but online, you could not. What is your general opinion of Vine Transit? We see that approximately 84% of respondents either have a positive or neutral opinions of Vine Transit, while 16% have negative opinions of our transit system. Question 3. So we asked overall, how satisfied are you with? And then respondents were given 5 options of extremely satisfied, satisfied, neutral, dissatisfied, and extremely dissatisfied. And we asked them a series of questions, and then they would choose one of these as an answer. So the first question, the time you waited for the bus, 72% of respondents were either satisfied to some degree or neutral about the time they waited for the bus versus 29% that were not satisfied with their wait times. Comfort at the bus stop. Now, this is a bit more of a subjective question. The answers could perhaps vary depending on which bus stop the rider took that day. Nonetheless, 70% were either satisfied or neutral, while 30% were not satisfied. Cleanliness of the bus stops, nearly 4/5 of respondents were either satisfied or neutral about the cleanliness of the bus stop, while 22% were not satisfied. Personal safety at the bus stop, we're happy to see the answers on this one also seem to skew towards the more positive neutral side, while only about 14% of respondents were dissatisfied. Information about bus service, while nearly 3/4 of respondents were either satisfied or neutral, it's worth noting that 15% are extremely dissatisfied. In the previous answers, the dissatisfied and extremely dissatisfied bars were about even and on par with one another, where this one, the extremely dissatisfied, seems to jump out quite a bit. So staff will be looking at ways to improve how we disseminate information about our service to our riders. Reliability of the bus being on time. Here's where we start to see a little bit more of a spread on the answers. As Rebecca talked about earlier, reducing the amount of missed trips as we get closer to filling in the driver shortage is a high priority for us right now as we come out of the pandemic. And additionally, ensuring that our live interactive map on our website accurately functions has also become a high priority for staff. Cleanliness of the bus. High 89% of riders were either satisfied or neutral on the cleanliness of the bus, while only 11% were not satisfied. Comfort on the bus itself. Another 89% of riders were satisfied or neutral with their comfort on the bus. In regards to those that were not satisfied, there were some written comments that I'll be addressing in just a few slides on this. So I'll put a little footnote on that for now. And for the last two questions of this overall, how satisfied are you with bunch of questions? Driver behavior and professionalism overwhelmingly received the most extremely satisfied answers compared to all the previous questions, which we are very happy to see. Convenience of bus stop locations, 78% of respondents were either satisfied or neutral about the convenience of the bus stop locations, while 22% were not. So the last multiple choice question we asked respondents is, how likely are you to recommend Vine Transit to a friend? With 1 being, no, I wouldn't recommend it at all, and 10 to being like, absolutely, I'd recommend it to a friend. So there was quite a spread in the answers, but if I were to lump the answers into categories here into the pie chart, you will see that 50% of respondents either put 8, 9, or 10, meaning that they're very likely to recommend it, while 35% were a little more in the maybe neutral 4, 5, 6, 7 range of like, maybe I'd recommend it, maybe not. While we had 16% that would not recommend it, choosing either 1, 2, or 3. All right. As I quickly alluded to, at the end of the survey, we did offer an option just for any general feedback, and this was just open. Survey takers could write whatever they wanted. So we received 72 written responses, and they were all over the map in terms of what kind of comments were made. Some of the comments were simply, I don't have comments, or some of them were like, you're doing a great job, happy face. But I did make an attempt to try to categorize them as best as I could. So the orange table you see on the left there were responses we received about specific routes. So specific route feedback. I just wanted to bold on the bottom, kind of the ones that had the highest written responses. So 7 written responses about Route 29, varying from having weekend service, stopping at the Sasko Gateway Transit Center again, bring it up to Calistoga or increase the frequency. And then the second route we received the most written responses about was Route W. And those varied from changing the times to suggestions of eliminating W2. So as a reminder, Route W operates bidirectionally in 2 loops. So there's loop 1, which was the original one we implemented in August 2021. We added a second loop, so that they're referring to that second loop we added there. Other frequent responses, the table in blue on the right there, overwhelmingly the most common written response we received in terms of trying to lump it into category is some kind of comment about restoring some kind of pre-COVID level of service, whether it was requests to bring back all of the original A through H routes, or some were just specific to, just bring Route A back. So I found this particularly telling here. A lot of comments about the on-time performance of the bus, whether bus times need to be more consistent, reduce the frequency of late buses, and that wait times are too long. And finally, I mentioned I'd come back to this about comfort on the bus. We received 4 comments stating that the seats on the bus are not comfortable or they're too hard. And they were specifically referring to some of our buses have orange plastic seats. So to address this, staff, we're looking at potentially getting some NVTA branded seat cushions that they'd be able to take with them and bring it on board with them, because trying to retrofit all the seats would be very costly and a big overhaul. And we feel like this would be a convenient way to help make their ride a little bit more comfortable. And then they could use it elsewhere too. As both Kate and Rebecca have alluded to earlier, in terms of surveying and where we're going from here, we're looking at doing a survey of the general public. As you saw, this one's very customer service, those that are taking the bus right now. But we want to kind of get an idea of the general public as a whole, looking at things like, okay, are you taking the bus? If you're not, why is that? So getting a better snapshot of what's happening overall in Napa County versus just what our riders are thinking. So at this moment, I'll hand it back to Rebecca, and hopefully those survey responses can help inform your decisions as we move along today.
Sure. So what you see here kind of tries to tie everything together at the very least. And so what you'll see in terms of the estimated cost for fiscal year 22-20 or 23-24 is what we already have budgeted. So that's that 13.7 million. And that includes, if you tie it back to what we had talked about earlier, basically the cost of purchased transportation plus fuel. So our maintenance and that admin are basically consistent no matter what option we may move forward with. So that's what you're seeing there. And we're currently offering 116,400 service hours, which is below that budget of the 13.7 million. So we have the option to do some expansion. So as you'll see, it basically makes its way across in terms of service hours. So shows you what it would be under the 3 options. Then it shows that estimated cost, and you can compare it back to that what we currently have budgeted, the number of drivers that we would need on the street, right? All an increase from that base of what we're currently doing, number of vehicles we would have out there, and then it kind of talks through both the opportunities and the obstacles associated with each of these. So things like, for example, on 1 and 2, in terms of opportunities, is it's more City of Napa service and more Route 10 service that would be in place. And then in terms of option 1, it would be improved on-demand wait times at the same time where we need to change the on-demand messaging because it would be a different way that we'd be operating it than we had before. Then in terms of option 2, very similar in ways to option 1, but in terms of the obstacles, it's an increase in the cost that we would have over our existing budget. And then it would remain kind of relatively high on demand wait times. And then in terms of option 3, right, we've got the advantage of kind of restoring service to what we were prior to COVID, right, where we had seen some rises in ridership, but it does come with a big price tag and a big increase in driver availability and vehicles. And so if I were to say, okay, this is, if we want to say options really for August of 2023, it will kind of be 1 or 2 with staff's preference for number 1 shown there in bold. And then that does not preclude us though from moving over time potentially to more of an option 3, but we would have to do a major push in terms of driver recruitment. And we'd have to feel we were in a good place on that front before we could make the others happen. So that's what I have right now on those 3 options. So again, we're going to kind of open it up for questions on maybe what the board's preferences are or questions they might have on those 3 options.
Just the one thing that I just wanted to add really quickly when you're thinking about this is when we implemented the services before COVID, the A through H structure in the city of Napa, we recognized that it was not maybe financially sustainable over a long period of time, but we had anticipated some strong growth in our TDA revenues to make it work, as well as identifying supplementary operating funds. So that was one thing that I think that we need to think about as we move forward. The other thing that we need to think about is how unstable the economy is right now. And this is really for discussion. We still have a lot of work that we want to do before we make any decisions. And we will, of course, come back to you and give you that information. Again, it would be a countywide survey on why our riders haven't come back. So we have a better understanding of what's going on. The survey that you saw that Libby walked you through was just for people who are currently riding the service. And then we probably want to take a stronger look at how we would implement any of the service options that you're recommending that we look at.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we have any board? Yes, Director Gregory.
Yeah, Rebecca, you walked us through the current wait time, and you said that's not good enough. What is a industry standard wait time, and what is also industry standard for what is too long to where they just say heck with it?
Yeah, what we're kind of seeing, we have been aiming for during COVID, kind of this 10 to 15 minute wait time. And we see basically once we get above 15 that our cancellations increase, right? People will be like, oh, no. And then that's fine if that bus has not left yet, but that's problematic for us if that bus, you know what I mean, is a few blocks away from you and already started on that trip, because then it has implications for that next rider. And so that's kind of what we'd be aiming for in terms of a wait time. So the 22.8 or something is too high.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I was just looking for the app for the on-demand app.
Yes, Ride the Vine.
Ride the Vine.
Yep, all one word. And it has a nice little V, the Napa V on it. So you would see it when you do that.
And so, excuse me, haven't used it yet, but so I go to any stop, I click on the thing, and then it tells the driver that there's somebody at this stop.
Essentially, yes. You put in your location. If you have enabled locations, it'll show you this is the closest stop to you. And then you put it in, you make your ride request. It tells you, okay, you are, in the queue and your wait time is X. And then you can watch the vehicle once it's assigned to you, make its way, similar to a TN's transit.
If there's nobody
network.
at other stops, it just goes to your stop.
It just goes to your stop. Now, I shouldn't say there's no other stops. And let's just say hypothetically, you were at Sheltler and Shirtlift, and someone was at Camille Creek and needed a ride and put in that request at the same time.
Right, okay.
So they would do Shelter at Shirtlift, they would do Camille, and then depending on where your destinations were, they would drop you off like 1, 2. So we see maybe 2 to 3 rides that would be on a vehicle at any given time, but not really more than that in terms of, because then your time on the bus, there's kind of an algorithm that controls that, goes too high, and they wouldn't say put that 4th ride on you.
Okay, no thanks.
Yes, Director Garcia.
Yes, from some of the other graphic representation, one of the bigger issues was wait time.
Yes.
So what are the challenges in improving that?
Mm-hmm. And so I guess really in option 1 and option 2, and what we had seen whenever we basically were in a position where our wait times were very high towards the beginning of when school came back in person. And so that's when we introduced the Route N and the Route S, because those routes, for example, can handle, say, 8 passengers per revenue hour, right? So we took some of that off the on-demand system and put it onto those fixed routes. So we got our wait times more reasonable. And then wait times started to go up again. And then we added the routes W and E, and we kind of brought our wait times again down. And so I feel like we're again at that position where we need to add some more fixed routes to take pressure off the on-demand. And then the difference between option 1 and 2 is just maybe how we handle that on-demand thereafter. So taking the pressure off of the on-demand by having these fixed routes, particularly at those peak times, at that commute to school, and when school gets let out, as you see, kind of that 7 to or 8 a.m. and that 2 to 3 p.m. are key.
Very good. Option 3. What's the acronym COA?
Oh, yes. Sorry. The Comprehensive Operations Analysis. You debate on trying to put in enough words, but making the font big enough that you can see. But that's the study that we did in 2018 and 2019 that resulted in the service change at the beginning of January of 2020. Okay. So that service that we operated for 2 months there.
Thank you. I think option 1 looks to be the most desirable. Just wondering how many people, in terms of ridership, you get frustrated with wait time and then forget the bus.
Right. Yep. And then they pick another option. So we don't want to have them do that, right? We want them to have that fixed route, or if they're in an on-demand area where it's only on demand, have that in a reasonable wait time.
Thank you.
Yes, Director Doreen.
Thank you. It would be helpful for me to get a better understanding of what the factors are that are playing a role with respect to recruitment and retention of drivers.
Mhm.
I mean, the city of St. Helena is facing recruitment and retention issues from top to bottom, from the maintenance worker all the way up to department heads, frankly. And it's all kinds of different issues. Housing is one of them, but what are the issues that affect our ability to attract drivers? And is this a highly competitive market in the Bay Area?
I think
Talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that we're seeing it across the board. And I think Alex had mentioned that as one of the constraints to increasing service right across the Bay Area. So we are definitely competing for drivers with surrounding counties, particularly Solano County. If you do just the map, the zip codes of where our drivers are coming from, we're getting a lot of our drivers from Solano County. So that's why I say in January of 2021, we increased our driver wages to basically be comparable with that in Solano, right? Because if you're in Solano and you live there and you can get the job as the bus driver for, more, why are you going to come to Napa? So that was at least the thinking there. And that has brought us some results. And for points there, we were say 10 to 12 drivers down. And now we're kind of in this 2 to 3 range. And each time we did do kind of the big increase then, and then it'll increase each year of the driver contract. So I think we need to continue to be aware of what the going rate is for drivers in the surrounding counties, and then maybe make adjustments if needed according to that. And I think talking with TransDev, their next thing would probably be not necessarily on the driver's front in terms of wage increase, but on the mechanics front in terms of wage increase, because we're competing a lot with not just transit agencies in that case, but also the private sector for mechanics, say, that would be making repairs on big rigs. So I think there's price. And I think moving to the new facility is going to change the world. So if you go for an interview right now and you come and you're a bus driver, you were sitting in a trailer that was supposed to be temporary. It might rain on your head if it's a bad day. And it's just not sending the right message. Like, this is where I want to work. Yeah. And so the new maintenance facility will not leak, and it will be closer to Solano County in terms of their commute to work. So I think that's kind of the next step, is get the new facility open, and then we can look at any other things we could do for drivers.
Thank you for that. Switching gears completely on the bus stop issue. And, I really like that depiction of the Napa Valley College bus stop. That's pretty impressive. Why is it that we are so utilitarian and just sort of bare bones with respect to our bus stops, at least up Valley? Sure. I know that we want to a certain degree, we want to discourage folks from sort of hanging out in bus stops, but we also want to encourage it. And it just seems like there's room for partnership with cities and NVTA with respect to making them more attractive. And frankly, there are areas in St. Helena where folks are just standing, like right across the street from the school district. There are folks standing heading north to Calistoga for a long period of time. There is no bus stop there. So I just think maybe we need to change our thinking about the use of those facilities and really hone in on making them more attractive for riders.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the whole discussion about what and where our shelters and our stops are located is an ongoing challenge with the cities and the county. On the highway, it's really hard because they get hit by cars all the time. And we do have a policy that prioritizes where we put shelters based on the population that uses them and the frequency. But we have also had so much pushback about, at our elected officials asking us to move stops, eliminate stops, comments from members of the public that they don't want their children at an ice cream store to be exposed to the bus people. I mean, there's a lot of prejudice around what we're having to deal with. And we're always open to discussion on that, but it has been a bit of a challenge. And maybe, Rebecca, you have something to add to that, but that's kind of the experience that we have.
Yeah.
And I would put out there, though, that maybe the Yountville partnership is a model. I mean, they obviously have paid a lot of attention to how they want their streetscapes to look, right? They were very involved in the style of the bus shelters that are in their community and wanted a uniformity to that. And then in addition to doing that, so we kind of agreed to that, they'll also make like, okay, they went for thatched roofs on the first go, but they're like, oh, that's not the best roof option. So they, for example, at their expense in this case, went ahead and made improvements to make them metal roofs on there. But they have, and they will assist some with cleaning, for example, and they made it a priority. We've got a lot of good stops within Yountville, and they make the encroachment permit process pretty quick for us, and they make it easy, actually similar in a way to American Canyon. In the city of Napa, to be honest, we are 2 years where we've been trying to replace 12 shelters. There's been multiple new requirements that have been put into that place. And I'm kind of stuck in a position right now where I can't kind of make it through that bureaucracy, that barrier. And so that has been hard. So things like that, because I've had the shelters, if that could happen more quickly, then I could move on to, you know what I mean, the next project.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you for that question, because again, you know, if you want people to feel welcome, you need to give them a space that is welcoming for them to start their journey, that's appealing, that's welcoming. And it's great to know that you're hitting some issues with the city of Napa, because the mayor just said he's going to take care of it for you. He just whispered that in my ear, like, no problem. I've got it handled. No, but please, you know, continue to communicate that to the board members, because you have, you know, obviously we're all elected. We're here to represent our residents, and transit's very important, and having access and that partnership is important to us. Are there any other? Yes.
Thank you. There are private transportation systems that transport the public, Uber and Lyft. Is there any understanding about how their presence, their growth, or their demise has affected the public transportation system?
Yeah, it's somewhat of it's a price thing, right? And in terms of, okay, there are certain people that would fall into a transit ridership category, regardless of the presence of Uber and Lyft, due to the price. So for example, you're going to take a ride within the city of Napa. It's $1.60 if you're an adult. It's 80 cents if you're a senior, $1.10 if you're a youth. You know, at no point are you going to get an Uber or a Lyft ride at that dollar value. So there's that. But I do think it's some of the higher incomes that we can compete with it. But I also think it can be complementary. Like I always think the example might be, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the airport, because we kind of currently have good service to the airport Monday through Friday. You might say, take transit to the airport because you're leaving on a Wednesday, take the 29 to BART, but your return trip, you might take BART to El Cerrito and then Uber home, for example. And so in that way, I think they can be very complementary. Or maybe you're taking transit up Valley late, you stay a little later than you were expecting in Calistoga, and then you might still have that Uber option home. So I think it does, overall, it can be complementary.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, Director Knight, sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Schenk, for your report. So in terms of just if you're looking for options, I think it's Mayor Garcia said it's probably safe to start with an option like option one, and then as you see on demand or transit, or look, you use the software you have to see where in those original routes that pre-existed COVID, and you could add them as needed. But I just wanted to encourage you, just as we listened to the MTC report about collaboration with schools and universities, that they have a successful program with their Clipper. But I think the more that you make connections with, if we're, with students, young people, we're here trying to think about how do we improve mass transit in the future. It's public education. It's developing an experience of use. And I know from my experience with, my daughters, I mean, it's more expensive to buy a vehicle. And so the more, other than maybe a couple events a year where We have a connection with the school district, and they're, and young people are learning that they can travel with a system to the ferry to San Francisco to go to events, and then they become users and hopefully lifelong users. But one thing we also learn is that maybe our children also teach us ways to use the things as they use it. So I think the more that we make connections with young people, then I think the better off and our future is brighter. So thank you.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense because, right, the student, say at St. Helena High is the student that then is at the Napa Valley College. Like we have them for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you for this comment. Okay, we ready to move on? Oh, okay.
Just as an aside, when we're looking at all the options, the one that talked about the wine and hospitality, I mean, it does bounce out to you. On 29, there's a whole lot of wineries. And if the message is you shouldn't drink and drive, then, your bus is your next best buddy. I mean, the ambiance is maybe a little skewed as you imagine a wine tasting in Napa via a public bus, but maybe it's not for the high end experience as much as it is for, a more sustainable guy or gal who wants to also have an opportunity wine tasting. There may be some money to be made with kind of a special route.
Yeah. So Director Joseph, we actually just did a presentation in front of the County Planning Commission about how we can use travel demand management tools to encourage alternative modes. And one of the suggestions, right, a developer or an expanded development has to have vehicle miles traveled mitigation. And one of the things that we suggested that could happen is that wine clubs could encourage people to use transit to access their tasting appointments and be incentivized by the winery by giving an additional discount or adding, free tasting or a few other options. So that there is something that we will, continue to sort of market. And I don't know, the Planning Commission commissioners, they didn't really have an action to approve, but I think that they were interested in actually using some of the tools that we had for VMT.
Good. Yeah, because that does seem to be another area where there's certainly the demand for it. And whether you can connect the dots is one thing, but at least it's a market that we should tap. So it's a good idea.
And I mentioned this earlier in joking, but I think silent disco is the answer. Let's get silent disco on the transit buses, and people will want to jump on and have fun as they go from one place to the other. Okay, Director Pedrosa.
Whatever incentive works. I think when Director Miller was talking, what's kind of the thought that came to mind is, it is a mix of incentives, and I think Kate's right on how do we incentivize the outcomes we want to see. But many of us around the table are local electeds. We also have to look at what incentives do we have in terms of land use and when we approve projects. I think what Kate was talking about is a good one to explore when we're approving new development. If we approve it, how are we part of the solution to incentivize multimodal, transportation, not single vehicle occupancy trips? Those are things that we potentially can do with conditions of approval. But I think a lot of what you're seeing, what I'm seeing in other municipalities that are being very bold and forward thinking, they're looking at parking ratios. They're looking at paid parking. In the region, we're looking at tolls. We're looking at pricing on all our major roadways. Those are the decisions that we're going to have to make, not ones that we want to make, but we have to make. And I think that's what we just have to look at. The easy solutions are gone. If there was one, we would have done it already. So I think it's how do we look within our own municipalities of what can we do to be part of the solution? And you're going to get public comment when we talk about paid parking or reducing parking ratios. We're going to hear it. And that's what we're hearing in the region. But we're having some very uncomfortable conversations like today with the state, who's going to say, we're not going to give you $500 million unconditioned. We're going to condition your funding. So that's just the purview of what we're seeing that's coming down our pipeline. So the more that we can kind of control our own destiny and control our own communities, the better off we're going to be.
Thank you.
Yes, I think we're ready.
Okay, perfect. So
Thank
I
you.
think our plan of attack here is we're going to do about 10 minutes on what we're calling opportunities. So things not this fiscal year, but things we can be thinking about long-term. Libby and I will go through those. And then at about 10:40, we will break for lunch. And then after everyone's got their lunch and they're settled, you can ask any questions about these opportunities. And then Diana will finish our day and our working lunch in terms of going through our section 5, the accessible transportation needs assessment. So what we have here on opportunities, and Director Pedrosa's comments really laid out nicely into this, is transit-oriented development, just in terms of advocacy and what we can do. One nice thing is that we've done what's called the AHSC, which is the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Grant Program. And we've, for example, are co-applicants for funding with the development company that's redeveloping on Old Sonoma Road, the old Housing and Human Services, into affordable housing, both for sale and rental, and some market rate. And that's the perfect opportunity where if we win that grant award, which we'll find out later this summer, we will get some electric buses out and they will get some funding for their housing, and we'll be able to improve the transit stops around there. So more things that we can do on that front. We talked already and about evening service with potentially a transit network company. And then in terms of the integration of mapping with the on-demand and fixed route, Danielle alluded to that earlier in terms of our plans. We have done a pilot with Amazon Web Services, and here where we've kind of proven this, where we could have one map where you would show both our fixed route and on-demand in one reality. You could do trip planning. And so we're hoping to move forward with that at full scale. And then Libby's just going to touch on potential future things that could be done in terms of airport service.
Yeah, so good morning again. Still Libby Payne here to talk about potential airport service options we looked at. So the first option we explored is expanding our current Route 29 service to offer 9 round trips on Saturdays and Sundays. And we'd have the schedule work around meeting the BART red line to SFO. And BART is actually making a lot of changes right now that are going into effect. It's starting in September. And there's going to be more BART options in order to get to both SFO and Oakland airports. The second option we explored is reviving the old Route 10X service. As a reminder, this was a pre-pandemic express route that mimicked the old Route 10, but limited the amount of stops between Napa and Calistoga in order to speed up service. In this newly reimagined version of it, the bus would continue beyond Calistoga and head west to Sonoma County, where it would stop at the Santa Rosa Airport, Smart Airport Station, and downtown Santa Rosa Transit Mall. There would be 3 round trips in the morning and afternoon on both weekdays and weekends. And I'll show you a map of this in just a moment. The third option we explored is reviving the old Route 25 service. This was a route that was discontinued before COVID due to low ridership, but used to go from Napa to the Sonoma Plaza. This reimagining of the service, the bus would extend service as far west as the Petaluma Transit Mall, which is immediately adjacent to the Smart Petaluma downtown station. So from there, a person, if they were trying to go to the airport, would get on Smart, head north, and head to the Sonoma County Airport Smart Station. There would be 8 round trips on weekdays and 5 on the weekends. And due to the previous low ridership in the town of Sonoma, as we are currently imagining this route, we would not stop in the Sonoma Plaza. However, we heard feedback from our Citizens Advisory Committee meeting recently that we may want to consider those that live in Sonoma and want to come to Napa. So perhaps offering some kind of options so that when the bus is heading eastbound back into Napa, those residents would have a transit connection to come into Napa. And I want to mention that overall, all 3 of these scenarios were outlined in the short range transit plan that was presented to you back in November. So as I alluded to, I'd be showing you a map. This is the newly reimagined Route 10X extension. You see it heads eastbound towards the Sonoma County Airport, Sonoma County Airport Smart Station, and Santa Rosa Transit Mall. And the Route 25 revival, here's what that would look like. There would be 3 stops: the Scottsdale Gateway Transit Center, Mola Park and Ride, and the Petaluma Transit Mall. And I didn't include a map for Route 29 because that route wouldn't be changing at all. It would just be adding the weekend service in there. So that was just a really brief look at these high-level concepts that we explored. And I'll turn it over to Rebecca to compare those 3 options.
And essentially the same charts and things that you're seeing before, it's tied back to the same fiscal year in terms of its cost. This does not take into consideration anything that we would do, say, in the city of Napa. This is just say, okay, this is our base and this is what would happen if we were one of the three, the Route 29 weekend service, the Route 10X revival, and the Route 25, and what that would look like, and then the opportunities and obstacles for each. So I'll kind of leave this slide up. We can do lunch. You can kind of think over it. And then when we come back, we'll take any questions on the different airport opportunities.
Thank you. I do have one question before
Yeah.
we go. And Libby, this might be for you or again, for Rebecca. Have we checked how long it takes on these routes? Have we done a time comparison? What that's going to look like for people?
Yeah, I drafted up some timetables. I don't have it off the top of my head, but is there a particular route you were interested
I was
in?
thinking each route because we know that time and cost is going to be something, it's frequency, it's consistency, and the time in which each route will take for people. So if you have some cost compare or time comparisons when we get back, or maybe in the future, I think that's really important information for people to know.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, these are still high level concepts. So like on the 10X, we could decide not to go to the Santa Rosa Transit Mall, for instance, and then obviously that would cut down on the time. So we could kind of come back with some data on if we went here, this is what the time would be. But if we cut off service at the airport and then headed back, this is what it would be.
Yeah, and I think when we get back to the office, we had done kind of a more elaborate discussion of the airport opportunities at our CAC meeting last month, and there just wasn't a lot of time in terms of the board, but we can send you those timetables, and that would give you a good idea of what we've mapped out thus far.
Thank you. Okay, so we're ready to take a little break. All right, thank you, everybody.
Madam Chair,
Oh,
I have one
yes.
question. Yes, thank you.
Yep.
On the evening service, what is meant by a transdev or transportation network company?
The Ubers and Lyfts of the world is like a
Okay.
transportation network company via,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
It's a fancy way of saying not any individual one of them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we'll return. At what time are we returning?
We're going to grab our lunch and we're going to have a working lunch.
Yeah,
So
so-
up at like 10 minutes,
10 minutes.
10, 15
15,
minutes.
yeah.
So that you can also use the facilities. But lunch is on the bar behind us. So please help yourself.
There. To this, to the front of us.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and continue having our working lunch. Are we on Zoom again and live streaming still? Okay. Well, thank you for anybody who's out there. We appreciate you being here. So we're going to continue with the comparison of airport opportunities. Do we want, is Rebecca or you or somebody else going to kind of lead us into this, or should we just have a conversation?
I think we can just have a conversation, yeah, and see what questions people might have as it relates to the airport. And then we'll go into our fifth and final thing on seniors and to say people with disabilities.
Thank you. And then we are going to have public comment at the end, because I know we have committee members, and thank you everybody who's here that serves on a committee and any public, and we can have public comment at that time. So we're getting there. We're getting close.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
And then we'll get on that bus about 12:30. Will be our
Thank
plan.
you. I think we're going to start. We were just discussing looking at the comparison of the airport opportunities, and I don't know if I represent the broader community, but when I'm going to the airport, I'm always nervous about running into traffic, running into Caltrans with a lane closure or something. And if I was to take public transit and looking at the different connections and how to get there, it would make me a little nervous, frankly. So I want to kind of put that out there and see how we can reassure potential riders that this is a reliable option for them. And then also, if we have looked at connections between our transit and connecting over to Solano County and Sacramento to get to the Sacramento airport. I know a lot of folks do like the Sacramento airport. There's a lot of options there. And if not, if we could potentially look at that at a later time.
Yes. So we did, Libby and myself kind of played that game, like how could you do it currently? And so like when you were saying about your concern about connections. So for example, if you're going from say Napa, you have one connection to BART, and then that red line takes you directly to SFO, basically directly to Oakland. So you've got one transfer point, right? As it stands right now, going to Sacramento, you essentially end up with two transfer points because you'd have to take the Route 21 over to Sassoon. You'd take the train to the city of Sacramento, and then there's a bus from the city of Sacramento over to Sac Airport. So it kind of it introduces that second connection and that third leg, which is why we kind of presented these options, which we thought were superior, I guess, in that you only had those two transfers, and we can kind of show you that in more detail. And by no means, this isn't something that we're, trying to do. We're just trying to start the discussion on the airport so we can bring some more information back about that.
Thank you. And that's looking at it as what is currently being offered by transit. It doesn't mean that there can't be a partnership or conversation with the other transportation authorities to work in partnership for a more streamlined process or delivery, correct?
Correct. But that is a whole different set. So there are 27 Bay Area operators, right, that are under the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And those does not include any of like, say, YOLO Bus or Amtrak or SAC RT, which would be what we were relying on. So it's kind of a different regional district. So we'd have to start a conversation with a different regional district, just makes it a little trickier in our world, but we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Director Garcia.
Yes, I've taken it the Route 29. It's worked out great. It's about 4 blocks from my house to where the pickup is in American Canyon, to El Cerrito, then take BART down to San Francisco Airport. Awesome. It's just I get off. We have family in New York, Brooklyn, so that's the flight. But take the luggage right through to practically get on the plane right there. So it's a great service. I think looking at other, mind you, I get it on at 5:30 in the morning, which is a bit early, but the return trip is a little more problematic. They on what time the return flight gets back.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something I think could be explored further.
Makes sense. Yes. And our first Route 29 leaves Napa at 4:30 a.m. So we can do a lot of early flights that way.
Thank you. It's great to hear that testimony, again, to hear that testimonial, and I'll have to try that. But you said it is a little bit, a little bit more complicated in returning. Is that because you need to figure out of course, the BART connection is probably a little bit easier, and then how when a BART you would land for the 29 route, how that.
Yeah, what time your return flight lands based on what.
Is that something that that could be like a on demand, or?
I think it's too far of a distance to be, you know what I mean, on demand to be practical. But what we can do if we have more service, right, on the Route 29 on the weekends, or even an additional trip on the weekday, then it wouldn't be as big of a deal. Say if you've got like that half-hour service, which we do at commute times, at more times during the day, then if you miss one, it's not that big of a deal for the next. So I think you could offer more service, but I don't think there's an on-demand option given the distance.
Yeah, I've had to take Uber on a return trip back,
Okay.
but it's a scheduling issue between flights and 29 service. There's, excuse me, there's one stop at the Vallejo Transit Center, and then it's onto El Cerrito. So it's great service. Thank you.
Great to hear that. Yes.
Yeah,
Dr. Gregory.
just to comment, this is a place where I think Uber is complimentary.
Mhm.
When I hear this, I mostly hear we miss Evans.
Yes.
When will we have something like that? Near the end, Evans was pretty expensive, close to $100 for a trip to the airport. And that's about what Uber is right now to get to the airport. So just a comment. I think this is where Uber or Lyft is very helpful.
Okay. Any other comments or feedback? Thoughts? Wishes? Magic carpet, Mayor?
Well, it's not our realm here, but I think we have some county people here too on expanded commuter service from the Napa County Airport. I mean, I think, Santa Rosa has been doing that, and, Charles Schultz. And so that hopefully in the world of transportation, Napa County Airport will see something similar. But I know that's not our preview here, but I think the county does manage the airport. That would be a
that's
wish.
an easy trip for us.
Yes.
I'll make one comment. It's hard to get my mind around all the different options and where we should be focusing, but I think just a general comment is I want us to keep trying and keep collecting data and be looking at how do we make it so that we really start taking public transportation to getting connected to these bigger areas and to the airports. Because yes, we miss Evans. I thought the same thing as a supervisor. Where is that in terms of just that reliability? And you knew you were going to one place, very direct. But if we can't have that, I don't want Uber and Lyft to be the only other solution. I want more people and less vehicles. So that means public transportation. And that's really the future as it gets more expensive to take our single-use vehicles. So I want us to keep being in it and pushing the envelope and figuring out how we can fund it and be flexible as we need and we get new data. So I hope we keep spending money in the right places like that for public transportation.
I think that's a great point. And for us that are also on the Napa County Climate Action Committee, we know that transportation is almost half of the climate pollutants that we experience here in Napa Valley. And that's I think that's actually statewide too. Transportation is number one, being from vehicle emissions. And so I think, Anna, that's Director Shuto, I think that's a really good point. And maybe there's opportunity to even lobby for more funds when it comes to those kind of regular commute public transit opportunities and needs to mitigate that. Anything else? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. All right, perfect. All right, so Diana Meehan, you're going to give us an update on the older adult accessibility for transportation.
I am. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Chair Alessio. Diana Meehan, Principal Planner, here to talk a little bit about the Accessible Transportation Needs Assessment. We kicked this off back in November, and the project, and just as a reminder, this assessment is to identify transportation needs and gaps in services for seniors and disabled individuals in Napa County. We kicked this off with a high-level view of existing conditions. We looked at community health assessments. We looked at previous studies that have been done either by the Happy Organization, Napa Solano Senior Needs Assessment that was done in 2019, and also our short-range transit plan. And some of the things that's high level, what we discovered is that a review of existing transportation services indicated that many individuals in the target population groups need access to medical care, and often outside of Napa County, as some of the medical services within Napa County can be limited. Another finding here is a perception that some of the services available, like VineGo, are only for medical services or medical appointments, and not that it can be used for other types of transportation needs. And in addition, many of these seniors live outside our service area boundaries in rural areas. Some don't have access to technology, making it even more difficult for them, and which also renders them dependent on vehicles and for their transportation needs. This is a countywide map of populations, adults age 65 and older. Each of those dots up there represents 30 individuals. And as you can see, the green line or the outline in green along the corridor on the map represents the service area where Vine Transit operates, as well as VineGo service area. That's the service area boundary. And as you can see, the majority of this population does live within the service area boundaries, but there are those who live in the unincorporated areas or the areas outside of our service area boundaries, and that would be the focus for closing gaps for services for those populations. Similar to seniors, the disabled population, same representation here, each dot 30 people. Most do live along the service area boundaries, but again, we do have some populations that live outside areas that are served by public transit. We did a survey from January through March. Some of the high level things that we discovered through the survey was that the barriers to using public transit that folks listed were that it wasn't frequent enough, or that they had a lack of familiarity with the system, how to use it. They hadn't used it in the past, and we're looking for information on how to use the system. Some of the respondents had perceived safety concerns, mostly ever since COVID. There's still a concern over exposure in using public transit. And then also that sometimes the stops might be too far from their home, or maybe some of the infrastructure is missing between where they live and where they need to get to a transit stop, making it difficult for them to make that journey. And most of the respondents indicated that they are still getting around using a motor vehicle. That's how most of us get around, either driving themselves or being driven by others. Most indicated the desire for more point-to-point ride system, kind of what Rebecca talked about, not making as many transfers when you get on your transportation and getting from where you're going to and from on an easy trip. And also maybe the need for some type of payment voucher system that helps with cost of transportation. We also did a peer review of 4 other counties: El Dorado, Lake, Mendocino, and Sonoma County. They're similar in geography. A lot of them are rural suburban locations. And we were comparing their services that they offer in those communities for what might possibly or have potential to work here in Napa County. And one of those services in El Dorado County is operated by Health and Human Services. It's a senior shuttle, and by design to help keep seniors independent when they're living without means to travel, a motor vehicle. And the cost for that ride is a $2 donation or a $5 if you go for an out-of-county trip. And there's another one in Lake County. It's called MediLink. It's a nonprofit provider that operates this service for seniors and disabled individuals that are trying to access outside county medical trips. And the rider cost for that trip is $10 one way or $20 for a round trip on that service. Our next steps essentially are to further analyze the data that we've collected to date, looking for gaps in services and additional information on how we might partner with other agencies and nonprofits to address the needs, particularly for those seniors and disabled individuals living outside of service area boundaries, and to convene additional stakeholder working groups and some community workshops to get a more indication of what people are looking for and what the needs are for these particular populations. And our goal is to finalize the plan by spring of early next year, spring 2024. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? No, okay. You know, I also serve on the Napa Solano Area Agency on Aging. And we know, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to see a real increase in terms of our older communities. I was just looking at the last CHNA for AAA, and it showed that in 2018, the combined population, because they did it for both for Napa and Solano, for age 60 years and older, Napa Solano was 135,000 roughly. They're going to see they're forecasting that by 2024, Solano is projected to see a 23% increase, which is surprising. And Napa, again, as I said earlier, a 16% increase in the population 60 or older. So this is going to be an ongoing and increasing need for us to address. Yes, Director Knight.
Thank you.
And then Director Shuto.
Thank you. So I just come back, I think about how we invite people or we tell them about our services, and I'm thinking collaboration is always probably a good mode to think about in terms of with the town of Yountville. We have a utility bill, we have a rec guide and things like that, where maybe working with the cities, we could put information in there about how to access public transit. And then I was thinking just generally about when you think about just health, and for example, that I have Kaiser, that the goal of a lot of preventative care is encouraging people to get to preventative appointments and things like that. And so maybe there's a way to partner with health organizations to find ways to get people to their appointments in a way that maybe even Kaiser would pay for, because it's certainly cheaper for them to have people have preventative care earlier and not end up in high care needs in hospitals and things like that, that maybe they would provide that information, provide subsidies or something to get people quickly and more efficiently to appointments. So anyway, just
That's a good point. And actually, that's actually listed on the AAA needs assessment that was just done a few years ago. That was one of the points that they made. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Dr. Shuto.
Just thank you for this, because it's the need that I hear the most about working with our senior community that's just been consistent every year, that they need help getting to appointments. And it's often even doctors, it's getting harder and harder to see people locally, and they're moving farther out. And so I think that this really is a concern for Up Valley, and I would love to be part of the conversation for some solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, I want to add about that, the Area Agency on Aging report is that the number one identified need for our older adults is transportation. That was number one. Number two is home delivery. 3 is assistance in locating housing. 4 is cash or material aid. And 5 is education on senior topics. But transportation for Napa County is number one. Yes, Director Garcia.
Appreciate the other comments as well. This is an essential service for seniors, largely medical services attainable through clinics, which are located in collective areas. So they need to be able to get population to and from. And I think it's a good service to provide, but the well-being of, as pointed out, number one issue with a lot of seniors is transportation. To get to that point where driving is no longer possible, and home care is critical for them. So.
Thank you. Okay, not seeing any. I think this is a good time for public comment. Okay, so we've got a place right over here next to Director Garcia. If anybody has public comment, please let me know. I know Ellen, come on up and. Oh, Ellen, right over here, right? So have a seat next to Director.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, no, you want to?
Are you sure?
Yeah, sit down. We want you to speak into the mic.
Okay.
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you. Now I'm just curious because I know Evans had shut down not before COVID. Now with the vine, is it possible if the vine could kind of carry on that same wall and maybe open up not just to the smaller airports, but to the bigger airports too? Because Evans did shut down. So is that possible?
So what we're talking about is taking our existing Route 29 that goes to the El Cerrito BART station, and that's how you would get to either the Oakland airport or to the San Francisco airport. Going to directly creates all kinds of other challenges for us. One, driver shortage, but also we would have to work with other transit operators and the MTC because we'd be operating in other operators' areas. And there's not very many systems that traverse both sides of the bay. Really, there's just BART, right, which is a rail service, AC Transit, and WestCat are the only three that do that. So
I was just curious.
and Golden Gate. Sorry.
Right, go ahead.
But it's a good suggestion. It just said it's not, it's hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand that. But my question is, do you guys know the reason why Evans had shut down?
Yeah.
Because that was the best shoppers in Napa Valley of going out to the other airport. So I was just curious if you guys know the reason why Evans had shut down.
I'm estimating it's financial. That if it made a profit, they would continue the service. As I'm guessing, as a business, it was just not profitable enough for them.
Okay.
But I don't know that for sure. I'm just kind of assuming.
Yeah, we have no affiliation with them or,
I wasn't sure.
or
I
any
was just
knowledge.
curious.
Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I was just curious. Back to when you guys were talking about the airport shoppers. So I was just curious if you guys would. Well, I see what you're saying, Anna. No,
Kate.
Stacy. Sorry. I just wanted to ask about that because that is really copying the shoppers, and if you guys are going to open 29 up to the airports, I was just curious if you guys could maybe think about maybe opening that up to how Evans was.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying, Kate, about that though.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Ellen.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I know
Thank you.
that's a question that many people in the Napa Valley, they have, and they do miss that type of transportation.
Yes.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Yes. Deborah?
Miss Donna. Miss Donna.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. I feel like I moved to the big kids table. Today actually is my 3-month anniversary of being the executive director at Molly's Angels, which thank you. Thank you. And I have learned so much, and this meeting is fascinating to me. And I echo from our constituents the concerns and the needs for more transportation. The thing I would leave you with, since I know we're all wanting to get on a bus, is that we are so grateful for the partnership of so many people in this room. Molly's Angels is amazing. Next year's our 25th anniversary, and we do not carry the load alone. And so just thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, I'm looking. Come on, just come on, step on up if you'd like to make a public comment. Anybody? No. Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Okay. So at this point, we're going to go on our tour. We're going to plan on leaving at 12:30. If you have to use the bathroom, I would suggest doing it here. There are porta potties there, but there's been a lot of contractors in there. So, that comes at your own risk. So make that decision. It's up to you.
Thank you. And Rebecca, before we're going to officially adjourn the meeting before everybody gets some leaves. Okay. Because I wanted to see if there's a couple more things on the agenda, but go ahead and finish.
Oh, yeah. And I was going to say, when we do leave at 12:30, after Liz officially concludes the meeting, we ask that you exit out this door. And then some of our staff will be out there with a hard hat and a vest. So NVTA staff, bring your own, but otherwise get it here. And I don't think we'll quite have enough here, but not to worry. Alton Construction will have them for you at the site. We have additional ones there. And then Chad Casper from Alton Construction will be leading us on the tour.
And
Excellent.
Chair Alessio, in
Yes.
compliance with the Brown Act, will be adjourning at the site.
Oh, we'll be joining at the site.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And when,
Please bring your Vine wine glasses with you. Those are for you to take home.
okay.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Let me just really quick, we probably don't have any future agenda items, but it's on our agenda. So I want to make sure there are no future agenda items. And if not, then I guess we're ready to board the bus, or if we're going. Okay.
When will we be back here? When will the bus bring us back?
Oh, it will bring you back no later than, we wouldn't be back here any later than 2. So we would leave that site by 1:45.
Okay. Okay. So we're good to go. Thank you.
2 o'clock.
Here at 2.